Ryan Carter stood in front of 300 shareholders, his voice steady as a scalpel. The compliance breach you're about to vote on? It doesn't exist. The audit trail was fabricated. The whistleblower is on Marcus Webb's payroll, and the regulatory filing cited in paragraph 7 refers to a subsidiary that was dissolved 18 months ago. The room went silent. Ava Sterling's hand froze on her pen. Across the table, Marcus Webb's face drained of color. Every document in your packet, Ryan continued, was designed to make you destroy your own CEO. Let me show you exactly how they did it. Before we dive into how a man selling sandwiches at dawn became the only person who could save a billion-dollar empire, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The alarm went off at 3:47 a.m., 3 minutes earlier than necessary, because Ryan Carter had learned that those 3 minutes were the difference between chaos and control when you were raising a 6-year-old daughter alone. He didn't hit snooze. Hadn't in 4 years. The apartment was small enough that he could hear Lily breathing in the next room, that soft whistle snore she made when she slept on her left side. He stood in the darkness for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, then moved through the familiar routine with the efficiency of someone who'd eliminated every wasted motion from his life. Shower. 3 minutes. Coffee. Black, no sugar, because sugar was a luxury that came with a crash he couldn't afford. Bread from yesterday, already sliced. Proteins prepped the night before. By 4:15, he was filling containers with sandwiches that would sell for $6 each from a cart outside Sterling Financial Tower. $6. He'd once closed deals where the decimal point mattered more than that entire number. Daddy? Lily stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair a mess of dark tangles that looked exactly like his when he didn't keep it military short. Hey, Bug. It's early. Go back to sleep. You forgot to kiss me goodnight. He had. He'd been calculating meat costs and comparing suppliers until midnight, and he'd walked past her room without stopping. Ryan set down the knife and crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. You're right. I'm sorry. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and for a moment the apartment didn't feel quite so small. Ms. Rodriguez says we're doing fractions today, Lily said against his shoulder. I don't like fractions. Nobody likes fractions. That's why they're important. That doesn't make sense. Most important things don't, Bug. Now go sleep another hour. Mrs. Kim will be here at 6:30. She shuffled back to bed and Ryan returned to his assembly line. Roast beef and Swiss, turkey and provolone, a vegetarian option with hummus that exactly 4 people bought every week. But those 4 people bought it every single day, so he kept making it. Predictability. Reliability. These were the foundations of the small life he'd built from the ruins of his big one. By 4:45, he was loading the cart. By 5, he was pushing it down 3rd Avenue in darkness, watching the city wake up around him. By 5:30, he was setting up in his usual spot, the same corner he'd claimed 3 years ago when he'd realized that pride was just another luxury he couldn't afford. The morning crowd started filtering in around 6:15. Delivery guys, security guards ending overnight shifts, administrative assistants who got in early to prepare conference rooms before their bosses arrived. Morning, Ryan. Morning, Tom. Usual? You know it. Tom was a security guard at Sterling Financial, 50-something, with a gut that suggested he'd been buying Ryan sandwiches for a while. He paid with exact change, every day, and never made small talk beyond the greeting. Ryan appreciated that. The rush hit at 7 o'clock, a 45-minute surge of people who'd learned his inventory and had their orders ready before they reached the cart. He moved through it efficiently, making change, wrapping sandwiches, maintaining the kind of pleasant neutrality that didn't invite questions about why a guy who moved like he'd once worn expensive suits was selling lunch meat on a street corner. By 8 o'clock, the rush was over. He had maybe 20 sandwiches left, which meant he'd calibrated correctly. The late morning crowd was different, smaller, more random, people who'd missed breakfast and needed something to get through to lunch. That's when she appeared. Ryan noticed her the way you notice a discordant note in familiar music. She was standing 15 feet from his cart, not in line, not moving, just standing in the rain that had started falling 5 minutes earlier. Everyone else was hurrying, hunching under umbrellas or newspapers, but she stood perfectly still, water soaking into what was obviously an expensive coat. She was maybe 30, sharply dressed despite the rain, with dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless but probably wasn't. She was staring at him, or maybe at the cart, with the kind of focus that made the space between them feel suddenly smaller. Ryan had learned to read people in his previous life. Had to. It was how he'd built a tech company from nothing, how he'd known which investors to trust and which ones were circling for weakness. This woman was evaluating something, running calculations behind eyes that hadn't blinked in the 30 seconds he'd been watching her. She stepped forward. "Do you have anything that isn't processed meat?" Her voice matched her appearance, precise, controlled, with an edge that suggested she didn't waste time on unnecessary words. "Hummus and vegetables, whole grain bread, no mayo." "What vegetables?" "Cucumber, tomato, red onion, spinach, olive oil and balsamic." She considered this longer than the answer warranted. "How much?" $6. "That's underpriced for this location." Ryan pulled out a sandwich, wrapped it, held it out. "Market price is what people pay, not what the location could theoretically support." She took the sandwich but didn't move. Rain was dripping off her hair now, running down the side of her face. She didn't seem to notice. "You don't belong here," she said. "I'm here every day." "That's not what I mean." Ryan had learned not to engage with this kind of observation. People saw what they wanted to see, a story, a mystery, a puzzle to solve. He'd found that silence was the fastest way to make them move on, but she didn't move on. "What did you do before this?" she asked. "Sold sandwiches somewhere else." "You're lying. I'm working. You want the sandwich or not?" She handed him a 20. He made change, counting it out precisely, and held it toward her. She took it, and for a moment their fingers touched. Her hands were cold from the rain. "Ava Sterling," she said. Ryan didn't react, but he recognized the name. It was on the building. Sterling Financial, the company that owned half the block and employed a third of his customers. "Enjoy your sandwich, Miss Sterling." She studied him for another long moment, and Ryan had the uncomfortable feeling of being read in the same way he'd just read her. Then she turned and walked toward the entrance of Sterling Financial Tower, sandwich in hand, rain still falling. Tom, the security guard, was watching from the doorway. "You know who that was?" Tom said when Ryan started packing up later. She introduced herself. "CEO, youngest billionaire in the city. Doesn't stop at street carts. Doesn't stop for anyone, really." Ryan shrugged. "Maybe she was hungry." "Yeah," Tom said, but he sounded doubtful. "Maybe." Ava Sterling didn't eat the sandwich. She sat at her desk on the 43rd floor, the wrapped sandwich in front of her, and tried to identify what had just happened. She'd been walking to the office, mind already 3 meetings ahead, when she'd seen him, the sandwich cart guy she'd passed every day for the past month without acknowledging. Except today she'd stopped. Why had she stopped? She unwrapped the sandwich carefully, examining it. The vegetables were fresh, the bread was actually whole grain, the olive oil hadn't soaked through. It was competently made. More than competently. There was a precision to it that suggested someone who understood the difference between adequate and excellent. Her assistant, Marcus, knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Morning briefing in 10. The Singapore deal is moving forward, but they want another round of due diligence. Legal thinks it's a stalling tactic." "It is," Ava said. "They want to see if we'll blink first." "Will we?" "No." Marcus nodded and started to leave, then paused. "Is that from the street cart?" Ava looked down at the sandwich. "Yes." "You never eat street food." "I'm aware of my patterns, Marcus." He left, and Ava took a bite of the sandwich. It was good. Better than good. The vegetables were crisp, the balance of flavors was exact, and the bread had the right ratio of structure to softness. She finished half of it before her phone rang. The day accelerated from there. Meetings, calls, decisions that affected hundreds of people and millions of dollars. By the time she looked up, it was 8 p.m., and her office was dark except for her desk lamp. Ava stood, stretched, and looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there, the sandwich cart guy was probably home, probably finished with his day. She wondered what he did with his evenings, wondered why someone who moved with that kind of quiet competence was selling sandwiches on a street corner, wondered why she was wondering. She made a call. "Background check," she said when her head of security answered. "Street vendor, works the corner of 3rd and Madison. Sandwich cart. I need to know who he is. There was a pause. Name? I don't have it yet. White male, early 30s, dark hair, about 6 feet. He's there every morning. This is unusual, Ms. Sterling. That's why I'm calling you instead of doing it myself. I want it by tomorrow. She hung up and gathered her things. On the way out, she threw away the second half of the sandwich. Not because it wasn't good, because it was too good, and that bothered her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Tutti. Ryan was reading to Lily when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. Lily was at the part of the story where the dragon finally admits he's lonely, and she always got quiet during this section, her face serious in a way that made her look older than 6. Why doesn't he just tell people he's lonely? She asked when he finished the chapter. Maybe he doesn't know how. But he's a dragon. Dragons are brave. Being brave about fighting isn't the same as being brave about feelings, Bug. She thought about this, then yawned. Ryan closed the book and tucked her in, checking the window lock and the nightlight like he did every night. Daddy? Yeah? Are you lonely? The question landed harder than it should have. Ryan sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes, but I have you, so I'm not too lonely. You should have a friend. I have friends. Adult friends. Ms. Rodriguez says adults need adult friends or they get weird. Ryan laughed despite himself. Ms. Rodriguez sounds wise. She is. She knows everything about fractions. Then we should definitely listen to her. Good night, Bug. Good night, Daddy. He pulled the door mostly closed and checked his phone. Unknown number. The message was short. We should talk. A.S. He stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it and went to prep tomorrow's ingredients. But the next morning, she was there again. Same spot, same time, standing in the early crowd but not part of it. This time she wasn't in the rain. The weather had cleared overnight. But she had the same focused intensity, like she was solving a problem that existed somewhere behind his face. Ryan served 3 customers before acknowledging her. When the small rush cleared, he met her eyes. Same as yesterday? I want to offer you a job. The words hung in the morning air between them. Behind Ava, the city was waking up. Taxis, construction sounds, the low hum of a metropolis starting its day. None of it seemed to touch her. She stood in the middle of the noise like a point of absolute stillness. I have a job, Ryan said. You're wasted here. I'm employed here. I had you checked out. Ryan's expression didn't change, but something went cold in his chest. Did you? Ryan Carter, former CEO of Technova Solutions. You built a cybersecurity firm from the ground up, took it to $40 million in revenue in 3 years. Then your COO and your lead investor orchestrated a hostile takeover using fabricated compliance violations. They pushed you out, dissolved the company, and sold the patents to a competitor. You spent the next 18 months in court, lost everything, and ended up here. She delivered it all in the same precise tone she'd used to order the sandwich. Facts, data points. The complete dismantling of his life reduced to a paragraph. You forgot the part where I have a daughter to raise and bills to pay, Ryan said. This cart covers both. I'm not interested. You haven't heard the offer. Don't need to. He turned to help another customer, a paralegal named Sarah, who always bought 2 turkey sandwiches and tipped $1. When he turned back, Ava was still there. Someone's targeting my company, she said quietly, using the same playbook that destroyed yours. Ryan's hand stilled on the sandwich he was wrapping. How do you know? Because I've spent the last 12 hours reading every filing from your case. The pattern is identical. Manufactured compliance issues, anonymous whistleblower reports, regulatory filings that cite violations in subsidiaries that don't technically exist. It's precise. It's surgical. And it's happening to Sterling Financial right now. Ryan handed Sarah her sandwiches and change, watching Ava the entire time. When they were alone again, he spoke carefully. Then hire a forensic accountant. Hire 10. You have the resources. I have resources, Ava agreed. What I don't have is someone who's seen the trap from the inside. Someone who knows how it feels when the walls start closing in and every move you make just pulls them tighter. You want me to relive the worst year of my life to save your company. I want you to use what you learned to stop it from happening to someone else. and I'm willing to pay you what you're actually worth, not $6 per sandwich." A businessman in a hurry stepped up, already pulling out his wallet. Ryan served him on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. When they were alone again, Ava was checking her watch. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. You have my number. Use it or don't, but decide quickly. The board meets in 3 days, and if I can't prove the compliance violations are fabricated, I lose control of my own company." She started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. "You're good at this," she said, gesturing at the cart. "The ratios are perfect. The inventory control is excellent, and you've built customer loyalty in a location with brutal foot traffic competition. But you're not here because you love making sandwiches. You're here because it's safe, because no one can take it away from you." "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough. I know you wake up at 4 a.m. because structure is the only thing that keeps chaos away. I know you chose this location because it's near your daughter's school. I know you're underpricing your product because you're not trying to maximize profit. You're trying to maintain exactly enough to survive without attracting attention." Ryan stared at her. "How? Because I do the same thing. Different scale, same instinct. Control what you can. Eliminate variables. Trust no one." She paused. "I'm offering you a chance to do more than survive, Mr. Carter. Think about it." This time when she walked away, she didn't look back. "What?" Ryan closed the cart early. He told himself it was because he'd sold out, which was true, technically, though he could have prepped more if he'd wanted to. He told himself he needed to pick Lily up from school personally, instead of having Mrs. Kim do it. Also true, though Mrs. Kim had never complained about the afternoon shift. What he didn't tell himself was that Ava Sterling's words had cracked something open that he'd spent 3 years sealing shut. Lily came running out of PS 118 with a painting that was mostly purple and a story about how Tommy Henderson had cried during music class because he forgot his recorder. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked. "It's Tuesday." "I know, but I got 100 on my spelling test, and Ms. Rodriguez says celebrations don't have to wait for weekends." Ryan looked at his daughter, paint on her collar, one sock higher than the other, eyes full of hope that 100 on a spelling test might equal ice cream on a Tuesday. "1 scoop," he said. "2. 1.5. Deal." They walked to the ice cream place on Amsterdam, and Lily got her 1.5 scoops of mint chocolate chip, while Ryan got nothing and tried not to think about Ava Sterling's job offer. He failed, because the truth was, he'd been good at his old life. Not perfect. Perfection was a myth sold by people who'd never built anything real. But competent. Strategic. He'd understood systems and how to exploit their weaknesses. He'd seen patterns where other people saw noise. And then Marcus Webb and David Chen had used those same skills to destroy him. The compliance violations had appeared slowly, almost naturally. A missed filing deadline, an accounting discrepancy. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to trigger audits. Then the whistleblower report. Anonymous, detailed, damning. Then the regulatory investigation. By the time Ryan understood what was happening, the board had already voted to remove him. By the time he proved the violations were fabricated, the company had been dissolved and the assets sold. By the time the legal settlements were finalized, he had nothing left except Lily and the knowledge that the system he'd trusted had been weaponized against him. "Daddy, you're not listening." Lily was looking at him with that particular expression of 6-year-old disapproval that meant he'd missed something important. "Sorry, Bug. Say it again." "I said Tommy's mom is getting married again. That's 3 times. Do people just keep trying until they get it right?" Ryan thought about his ex-wife, who'd left 2 years into his legal battle because she hadn't signed up for poverty and public humiliation. Thought about the divorce papers that had arrived the same week he'd lost the company. Thought about the custody arrangement that had given him Lily full-time because her mother had already moved to California with someone who hadn't failed spectacularly at everything that mattered. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people keep trying because they believe something better exists, and sometimes they're right. Are you going to try again?" "At what?" "Marriage, love, adult stuff." Ryan laughed and wiped ice cream off her chin. "You're 6. You shouldn't know about adult stuff." "I'm 6.5. And you didn't answer." "I don't think about it much, Bug." "Why not?" "Because the idea of trusting someone again felt like standing in an open field during a lightning storm. Statistically unlikely to end badly, but why take the chance?" "Because I'm busy," he said instead. "Now finish your ice cream before it melts." That night, After Lily was asleep, Ryan sat at his small kitchen table and did something he hadn't allowed himself to do in years. He searched for information about Technova Solutions. The company didn't exist anymore. The website was gone, redirecting to a generic holding page. The patents had been sold to a competitor called SecureNet, which had quietly integrated the technology and made millions. Marcus Webb was now a VP there. David Chen was on the board. They'd destroyed his company and profited from the pieces. Ryan closed the laptop and stared at the wall. He'd made peace with this. Had to. Anger was gasoline, and he'd learned the hard way that burning everything down didn't leave you warm. It left you cold and surrounded by ash. But Ava Sterling had walked into his carefully controlled life and offered him something he'd thought he'd never have again. Leverage. Not revenge. He'd passed that exit a long time ago, but the chance to use what he'd learned, to stop someone else from experiencing the particular hell of watching their life's work dismantled by people they'd trusted. His phone was in his hand before he'd consciously decided to pick it up. The message was short. "Tell me about the compliance violations." Her response came 30 seconds later. "Tomorrow, 6 a.m., my office. Bring questions." Ryan set down the phone and went to bed, but he didn't sleep. Because tomorrow, he was walking back into the world that had chewed him up and spit him out. And this time he was going in with his eyes open. Sterling Financial Tower looked different from the inside. Ryan had walked past it 1,000 times, had sold sandwiches in its shadow, but he'd never been through the lobby. Security was tight, ID check, metal detector, visitor badge that had to be scanned at the elevator bank. Tom, the security guard, did a double take when he saw Ryan in slacks and a button-down instead of his cart apron. Meeting? Apparently. With Sterling herself? That's what the badge says. Tom whistled low. "You moving up in the world, Ryan? Just visiting?" The elevator was glass and steel, rising so smoothly it felt like standing still while the city fell away beneath them. 43 floors up, the doors opened onto a reception area that was all clean lines and expensive silence. A young man, Marcus maybe, though Ryan hadn't been introduced, escorted him to a conference room where Ava was already waiting. She had 3 monitors set up, 2 laptops, and enough paper to start a small fire. "You're early," she said without looking up. "So are you." "I'm always early. Coffee?" "Black." She poured 2 cups from a carafe that looked like it cost more than his weekly groceries, then sat across from him. In the early morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she looked tired. Not messy. Ava Sterling didn't do messy, but tired in a way that suggested she'd been awake as long as he had. "The short version," she said, "is that 6 weeks ago, we received an anonymous tip about accounting irregularities in our European division. Standard procedure is to investigate internally, which we did. Found nothing. 2 weeks later, a regulatory filing appeared citing violations in a subsidiary that handles compliance documentation for our overseas operations. Let me guess," Ryan said. "The violations reference transactions that technically occurred but were structured in a way that makes them look suspicious when isolated from context." Ava's eyes sharpened. "Yes. How did you know?" "Because that's what they did to me. They take real transactions, legitimate ones, and remove the surrounding context until they look like evidence of wrongdoing. The beauty is that the transactions actually happened, so you can't claim they're fabricated, but the interpretation is deliberately misleading. We've explained the context. The regulators aren't satisfied. Because the goal isn't truth, it's delay. Every day you spend defending yourself is a day you're not running your company. Every investigation creates uncertainty, which affects stock price, which creates pressure from shareholders." Ava leaned back, studying him. "You sound like you've given this speech before." "I've lived it before." "What's the timeline?" "Board meeting in 3 days. The Compliance Committee is recommending a temporary suspension of my authority pending the investigation's conclusion. If that vote passes, interim leadership goes to the vice chairman." "Who's the vice chairman?" "Malcolm Cross. He's been with the company 20 years, solid reputation, institutional knowledge, generally respected." "Does he want your job?" "Everyone wants my job, Mr. Carter. The question is whether he wants it enough to orchestrate this." Ryan stood and walked to the window. From 43 floors up, his sandwich cart would be invisible. The whole street would be invisible. Up here, the city was just patterns and numbers, Problems to be solved with enough data and leverage. He'd forgotten what it felt like to operate at this altitude. "Show me the filing," he said. Ava pulled up a document on the center monitor. Ryan scanned it, his mind automatically cataloging details. The language was precise, the citations were specific, and the violations were described in a way that sounded damning if you didn't understand the underlying business structure. It was elegant, professional, familiar. "This is Marcus Webb's work," he said quietly. Ava went very still. "Explain. The structure, the pacing, the way it builds from small inconsistencies to larger implications without ever making direct accusations. Webb used this exact approach on me. He'd spent 2 years as my COO learning how I thought, how I structured deals. Then he used that knowledge to build a trap that looked like my own mistakes." "You think Webb is behind this?" "I think whoever's behind this studied the same playbook. Maybe it's Webb. Maybe it's someone who learned from him. But this isn't random. This is targeted." Ava stood and walked to the window beside him. They were both silent for a moment, looking out at the city. "If you're right," she said finally, "then defending against the violations won't work. We need to expose the mechanism itself." "Yes, and you know how to do that. I know how it was done to me. I know what I'd do differently if I could go back." "That's why you're here." Ryan turned to face her. Up close, he could see the calculation in her eyes, the same evaluation she'd done at his cart, but deeper now, more thorough. She was measuring him against some internal standard, deciding whether he was worth the risk. He understood. He was doing the same to her. "I have conditions," he said. "Name them. My daughter comes first, always. If I need to leave for her, I leave. No questions, no guilt." "Agreed. I'm not coming back to corporate life permanently. This is a project, not a career change. When it's done, I'm done." "Understood. And I need access, full access. Board minutes, financial records, personnel files, email archives. If there's a paper trail, I need to see it." Ava considered this. "That level of access requires trust." "Yes. You're asking me to trust a man I met yesterday who sells sandwiches for a living. I'm asking you to trust someone who's been exactly where you are and knows what it costs to lose." Something flickered in her expression, recognition, maybe, or respect. She extended her hand. 3 days, Mr. Carter. Find me proof that holds up in front of the board, and I'll pay you what you should have made if your company hadn't been stolen." Ryan shook her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, exactly calibrated to convey confidence without aggression. 3 days, he agreed. And just like that, Ryan Carter stopped being a man who sold sandwiches and became, once again, someone who solved problems that existed in the spaces between numbers and human nature. He'd forgotten how much he'd missed it. He'd forgotten how much it had cost him last time. But he was already committed now, already pulling up files on Ava's laptop, already seeing the patterns that others had missed. Somewhere in this data, someone had made a mistake, had left a fingerprint, a signature, some evidence of the human being behind the strategy. Ryan just had to find it before the trap closed, and Ava Sterling lost everything the way he had. The clock was ticking. The first thing Ryan found was a ghost. Not literally, though at 2 a.m. in an empty office building, hunched over financial records that should have been straightforward, it felt close. The subsidiary cited in the regulatory filing existed on paper, had a tax ID number and corporation documents, even a business address in Luxembourg. But when Ryan traced the actual money flow, the transactions didn't match the stated purpose. "You're still here." Ryan didn't jump, but it was close. Ava stood in the doorway of the conference room, still in the same clothes from yesterday morning, holding 2 cups of coffee that suggested she'd never left either. "The European subsidiary," Ryan said. "Transcorp Holdings." "When was it established?" 4 years ago. Why? Because it received exactly 3 wire transfers in its entire existence. 2 during the first month of operation, 1 6 weeks ago. The first 2 total $40,000, barely enough to establish legitimacy. The third was $800,000. Ava set down the coffee and moved to the monitor. "That's the suspicious transaction flagged in the filing." "Right, but look at the routing." Ryan pulled up another screen. The money came from Sterling Financial's operating account, moved through Transcorp, then got distributed to 5 different vendors across 3 countries within 48 hours. Those are legitimate vendors. We've verified them. I'm sure you have. But the distribution pattern is wrong. Look at the amounts. They're too even. 160,000 each, exactly. No negotiation, no variation, no payment terms. It's not how real procurement works. Ava leaned closer, studying the numbers. She smelled like expensive coffee and exhaustion, and Ryan was suddenly aware of how small the space between them had become. He shifted back slightly, maintaining distance. "You think the vendors are fake?" she asked. "I think the vendors are real, but the purchases aren't. Someone created Transcorp as a pass-through, used it to move money to real companies, and those companies probably kicked back most of the funds to whoever orchestrated this. The beauty is that when regulators investigate, they'll find legitimate businesses that received payment for legitimate-looking services. But the services were never actually rendered." Exactly. And proving that is nearly impossible because you'd need to audit 5 separate companies in 3 countries, all of which have plausible deniability. They thought they were being hired for real work. By the time anyone figures out the work was unnecessary, the money's already moved again. Ava was quiet for a long moment, her finger tapping against the desk in a rhythm that suggested she was running calculations. "This level of coordination requires inside access," she said finally. "Someone who knows our vendor relationships, our approval processes, our banking infrastructure." "Yes." "That narrows it down to maybe 30 people. More like 5. This isn't just access, it's deep institutional knowledge. Whoever did this understands your systems well enough to exploit them without triggering automated flags. That takes years." Ava pulled up a different screen, typed something, then turned the monitor toward him. It was an organizational chart. "These are the people with that level of access. Malcolm Cross, Vice Chairman, Patricia Chen, CFO, David Reeves, Head of European Operations, Marcus Webb." She stopped. "Wait, Marcus Webb?" Ryan's head snapped up. "What about him?" "He's not on our payroll, but he consulted for us 8 months ago. Due diligence on a potential acquisition target." She was typing rapidly now, pulling up files. "He recommended against the acquisition. We passed. The target company filed for bankruptcy 3 months later." "Let me guess. Someone bought the assets at liquidation prices." Ava's face had gone very still. SecureNet. The name hung in the air like smoke. Ryan stood up, walked to the window, tried to keep his breathing steady. Outside, the city was starting to wake up. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the first gray light of dawn touching the tops of buildings. "Webb's not just using the same playbook," Ryan said quietly. "He's running the same play. Create a crisis, position himself as the solution, profit from the aftermath. If he's behind this, he's not working alone. The coordination is too complex. No, he's never worked alone. When he came after my company, he had David Chen with him. Chen handled the financial engineering while Webb managed the political manipulation. Together they were..." Ryan stopped himself. The memory was still sharp enough to cut. "They were very effective. Chen. Patricia Chen is my CFO." Ryan turned. "Family relation?" "Sister, they're twins." Ava's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they're holding very still against something painful. "Patricia has been with Sterling Financial for 6 years. She came highly recommended. Her credentials were impeccable." "I'm sure they were. Chen's brilliant at his job, the legitimate parts and the illegitimate ones. If his sister has the same skill set, and Webb brought her in 6 years ago, she's been positioning this for years." Ava sat down slowly, like her legs had stopped supporting her weight. "Building credibility. Learning our systems. Waiting for the right moment." Ryan recognized the look on her face. He'd worn it himself 3 years ago, sitting in a lawyer's office, realizing that people he'd trusted had been systematically dismantling his life while smiling to his face. "The board meeting is in 2 days," he said. "We need evidence that connects them. We have patterns. We don't have proof." "Then we find proof." Ava looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he saw something crack in her careful control. Not much, just a hairline fracture, but enough to remind him that beneath the billionaire CEO was a person who'd built something and was watching someone try to take it. "What if we can't?" she asked. "Then we make them show themselves." "How?" Ryan pulled up the organizational chart again, studying the names, the relationships, the power structures that governed who could do what. An idea was forming, risky and probably stupid, but he'd learned a long time ago that safe moves only worked when you weren't already losing. "Malcolm Cross," he said, "the vice chairman. What do you know about him?" "Malcolm's been with the company since before I took over. He's old guard, traditional, cautious. Doesn't like change but respects results. Why?" "Because if Webb and Chen are planning to move against you at the board meeting, they need Cross to vote with them. He's the swing vote. If he sides with you, they lose. Malcolm won't be easy to convince. He values stability above everything else." "Good. That's what we use." Ryan started pacing, the pieces clicking together. "We can't prove the conspiracy yet, but we can prove the compliance violations are manufactured. If we can show Cross that voting against you creates more instability than keeping you in place, he'll make the rational choice." "You're suggesting we flip him before the meeting." "I'm suggesting we give him the truth and let him make his own decision, but we need to move fast. If Webb suspects we're onto him, he'll accelerate his timeline." Ava stood, some of her usual sharpness returning. "I'll set up a meeting with Malcolm for this afternoon. Private, off-site. What else?" "I need to look at Patricia Chen's work history. Every financial report she's signed off on, every vendor relationship she's approved, every decision that seemed reasonable at the time but might look different in context. That's thousands of documents. Then I'd better start now." Ava studied him for a moment, and Ryan wondered what she was seeing. A failed entrepreneur playing detective? A man who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to protect? Or maybe just someone who understood what it meant to be trapped and was willing to do something about it? "Why are you doing this?" she asked. The question surprised him. "You're paying me." "That's not why." She was right, but Ryan wasn't ready to examine the real reasons too closely. Wasn't ready to admit that being back in this world, using his brain for something more complex than sandwich inventory, felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. "Because I know what happens if we lose," he said instead, "and I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Ava nodded slowly, accepting the partial truth for what it was. "There's a shower down the hall, clean shirts in the executive gym. You should use both before Lily wakes up." Ryan checked his phone. 5:47 a.m. In 13 minutes, Mrs. Kim would arrive to get Lily ready for school. In 2 hours, Lily would be wondering why her dad hadn't said goodbye. In 3 hours, she'd be sitting in class, maybe thinking about fractions or Tommy Henderson or whether adults got weird when they didn't have friends. "I need to go home," he said. "Send me your address. I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30. "I don't need—" "You do if you're going to be functional. Sleep in your own bed. Say goodbye to your daughter. Come back ready to work." She paused. "This is going to get worse before it gets better, Mr. Carter. Make sure she knows you're okay." Ryan wanted to argue, but she was right. He was already violating his first condition, that Lily came first. 2 all-nighters in a row and he'd be useless to everyone. 7:30, he agreed. The car was black, expensive, and exactly on time. Ryan had managed 4 hours of sleep, a breakfast with Lily, where he'd explained that he was helping someone with a big project, and a promise that he'd be home for dinner. Lily had accepted this with the adaptability of 6-year-olds, more interested in the fact that he was arriving in a fancy car than what the car meant. "Is she your girlfriend?" Lily had asked, peering through the curtains. "Who?" "The person you're helping. Miss Rodriguez says when adults help each other a lot, sometimes they fall in love. Miss Rodriguez needs to focus more on fractions and less on my personal life." "That's not a no." "It's not a yes either. Now go brush your teeth." The drive back to Sterling Financial gave Ryan time to review the files he'd downloaded to his laptop. Patricia Chen's work history was exactly what you'd expect from a high-level CFO. Thorough, competent, unremarkable. Which was probably the point. The best conspiracies didn't look like conspiracies. They looked like business as usual right up until the moment they weren't. But everyone made mistakes. Everyone left traces. Ryan just had to find the one moment where Patricia had been human instead of perfect. He found it in a vendor approval from 18 months ago. The vendor was called Meridian Consulting, based in Dublin, specializing in regulatory compliance advisory. The approval was for a 6-month contract, $300,000, signed off by Patricia without going through the usual competitive bidding process. Alone, it meant nothing. CFOs approved vendors all the time, and regulatory consulting was expensive. But when Ryan cross-referenced Meridian Consulting with Marcus Webb's known business relationships, he found something interesting. Webb had listed Meridian as a client reference on his LinkedIn profile. The timing was perfect, right before he'd consulted for Sterling Financial on the acquisition due diligence. Ryan pulled up Meridian's corporate registration. The company had been established 3 years ago. The registered agent was a law firm in Dublin that specialized in shell companies for international clients. He was still digging when Ava walked in at 8:15 looking like she'd actually slept. "Malcolm agreed to meet," she said. "Noon at his club, private dining room." "Good. I need you to see something first." Ryan walked her through the Meridian connection, watching her face as the implications registered. "You think Webb and Patricia used Meridian to establish a relationship," she said. "Then Patricia brought Webb in as a consultant, giving him access to our systems. And Webb recommended against the acquisition, which failed, which SecureNet bought, which made Chen and Webb a lot of money. It's the setup for what's happening now. They tested the strategy on a smaller scale, saw that it worked, and decided to go bigger. This still isn't proof. Meridian could be legitimate. Webb's recommendation could have been honest. Patricia's approval could have been standard procedure. You're right. Which is why we need Patricia to make a mistake. Today, before the board meeting." Ava's eyes narrowed. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to offer her a way out." "That's insane. If she's involved, she's scared. Conspiracies only work when everyone stays committed. But the closer we get to the board meeting, the higher the stakes become. She's the weak link, not Webb. He's done this before and won. She hasn't. You want to turn her. I want to see if she'll turn herself. If she's innocent, she'll be confused and defensive. If she's guilty, she'll either panic or try to buy time. Either way, we learn something." Ava considered this, her finger doing that tapping thing again. "It's risky. So is going into the board meeting without enough evidence. When do you want to approach her? This morning, before she talks to Webb, before she has time to prepare." Ryan closed his laptop. "But I can't be the one to do it. It has to be you." "Why?" "Because you're her boss. Because she spent 6 years building your trust. Because if you walk into her office and tell her you know something's wrong, her first instinct will be to protect that relationship. That's when people make mistakes, when they're trying to hold on to something that's already slipping away." Ava was quiet for a long moment, studying him with that same evaluative intensity. "You've thought about this a lot," she said finally. "About how it feels to be betrayed." "I've had 3 years to think about it. And if she doesn't break? If she's as good as her brother? Then we go to Malcolm with what we have and hope it's enough." Ava stood, smoothed her jacket, and became again the person Ryan had first met, controlled, precise, unreadable. "Patricia's office is on 41. I'll go now. You stay here and keep building the case. If this works, I'll need everything you can find on Transcorp and Meridian ready to show Malcolm." "Ava," she stopped at the door. "Be careful," Ryan said. "Webb's playbook includes using people's trust against them. Don't give her ammunition." "I'm not you, Mr. Carter. I don't trust easily." "That's what I thought, too." She left without responding, and Ryan went back to work, trying not to think about what would happen if Patricia Chen was as good at lying as her brother. An hour later, his phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "She knows. Office. Now." Ryan took the stairs down 2 floors, running scenarios in his head. Patricia knew, but what did she know? That they suspected her? That they had evidence? That Ava had been bluffing? He found Ava in her office, standing at the window with her back to the door. Her shoulders were tight, her hands clasped behind her back in a way that suggested she was holding herself very still. "What happened?" "I told her we'd found irregularities in the European division transactions, that I needed her to walk me through the approvals. She said she'd need to pull the files. I said I already had them. Then she asked if I was accusing her of something. And I said no. I was asking for her help understanding something that didn't make sense. She said she'd look into it and get back to me." Ava turned around, and Ryan saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Anger, barely controlled. Then she asked if I'd been talking to outside consultants about internal financial matters. She specifically asked if I'd hired anyone recently. "She knows I'm involved, which means Webb knows, which means they know we're looking." Ava's voice was flat, but her hands were shaking slightly. I gave her exactly the opening you said would make her panic, and instead she threatened me. Very politely, very professionally, but it was a threat. Ryan moved to the desk, pulled up the security system, and checked the camera feeds for Patricia's office. She was on her phone, pacing, talking rapidly. Her office door was closed, the blinds drawn. She's calling Webb right now, Ryan said. I can see that. Good. Let them panic. People make mistakes when they're panicked. They also accelerate their plans. Ava's finger was tapping again, faster now. If they move the board meeting up, if they call an emergency session, they won't. Moving the meeting makes them look reactive, which undermines the narrative that you're the unstable one. They'll stick to the timeline and try to contain us before the meeting. How? Ryan was about to answer when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Carter. The voice was smooth, professional, familiar in a way that made Ryan's chest go tight. This is Marcus Webb. I think we should talk. Ryan put the phone on speaker. Talk. I understand you've been helping Ava Sterling with some financial questions. That's admirable, really, using your skills to help someone who needs guidance. But I'm concerned you might be operating with incomplete information. About what? About the nature of Sterling Financial's challenges. You see, I've worked with Ava for some time now. She's brilliant, no question. But she has a tendency to see conspiracies where there are simply mistakes. Regulatory issues where there's just poor documentation. It's a kind of paranoia that comes from being at the top too long. Ava's face had gone very still. That's an interesting theory, Ryan said carefully. It's not a theory. It's a pattern I've observed. And I'd hate to see you get caught up in something that damages your reputation. You've already experienced one very public professional failure. I'd hate to see you experience another. There it was. Not quite a threat, but close enough. Thanks for the concern, Ryan said, but I'm pretty comfortable with my decisions. Are you comfortable with your daughter's school? PS 118, isn't it? On Amsterdam? I only ask because private school applications are opening up soon, and I know some people on admissions committees who could be helpful. For friends. Ryan's vision went red at the edges. You don't go near my daughter. I'm not threatening your daughter, Mr. Carter. I'm offering to help. But help requires trust, and trust requires honesty. Right now you're being used by someone who's desperate and seeing enemies everywhere. I'm giving you a chance to walk away before this gets messy. Ava stepped forward and took the phone. Marcus, she said, her voice ice. This is Ava. If you contact Mr. Carter again, if you mention his daughter again, if you so much as think about either of them, I will use every resource I have to destroy you. We both know I have more resources than you do. Ava, I was just trying to be... The board meeting is in 36 hours. See you there. She hung up and handed Ryan his phone. Her hand was steady now, the shaking gone, replaced by something harder. I'm sorry, she said. I should have anticipated. He was fishing, trying to see if we'd react. Ryan's jaw hurt from clenching it. He doesn't know what we have. He's scared. He threatened your daughter. He implied he could help with schools. It's not the same thing. It's close enough. If you want out. I don't want out. I want to finish this. They stood there for a moment, and Ryan realized they'd crossed some kind of line. This wasn't just about compliance violations or corporate conspiracies anymore. It was personal, for both of them. Malcolm's meeting is in 3 hours, Ava said finally. We need to be ready. They worked in focused silence, building the case piece by piece. Transcorp's ghost transactions. Meridian's shell company structure. Patricia Chen's approval patterns. Webb's consulting history. None of it was smoking gun proof, but together it formed a picture. And the picture showed two people systematically positioning themselves to take over Sterling Financial. At 11:45, they left for Malcolm's club. The place was old money and older traditions. Leather chairs, mahogany panels, waiters who moved like ghosts. Malcolm Cross was waiting in a private dining room, a man in his mid-60s with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he'd seen every corporate game and hadn't been impressed by any of them. Ava, he said, standing to shake her hand. You said this was urgent. It is. Malcolm, this is Ryan Carter. He's been helping me understand some financial irregularities. Malcolm's handshake was firm, his eyes shrewd. I know who Mr. Carter is. I also know why he's no longer in his previous industry. Forgive me for being direct, but why should I trust the analysis of someone who lost his own company? Ryan had expected this. Because I lost my company the same way Ava's about to lose hers, and I know what the warning signs look like. He laid out the case, walking Malcolm through each piece of evidence, each connection, each pattern. Malcolm listened without interrupting, his expression unchanging. When Ryan finished, Malcolm sat back and was quiet for a long moment. "This is serious," he said finally. "If you're right." "We're right," Ava said. "Maybe, but serious accusations require serious proof. What you've shown me is suggestive, not conclusive, which is why we need your help," Ryan said. "Vote to table the Compliance Committee's recommendation. Give us 2 weeks to complete a full audit. If we're wrong, the delay costs nothing. If we're right, you've saved the company. And if I vote with Patricia and Marcus, what happens? Ava gets suspended. Interim leadership goes to you as vice chairman. Within 6 months, you'll face the same compliance issues Ava is facing now, because the goal isn't to remove Ava, it's to destabilize leadership enough that selling the company becomes the rational choice." Malcolm's eyes sharpened. "To secure net, Webb and Chen have done this before. They did it to my company. They're doing it to Sterling Financial. And if they succeed, you'll be the one who has to explain to shareholders why you let it happen." The silence stretched out. Malcolm looked at Ava, then at Ryan, then back to Ava. "The meeting is tomorrow at 10, he said finally. "I'll table the vote on one condition." "Name it," Ava said. "Mr. Carter presents the evidence to the full board. If you're going to accuse Patricia Chen and Marcus Webb of conspiracy, you do it directly, and you stake your reputation on it. No hiding behind consultants." Ryan felt Ava tense beside him. "Done," Ryan said before she could object. Malcolm stood. "Then I'll see you both tomorrow. And Mr. Carter, I hope for all our sakes that you're better at this than you were at running your own company." It should have stung, but Ryan just nodded. "So do I." They left the club in silence, got back in the car, drove 3 blocks before Ava finally spoke. "You don't have to do this. I can present the evidence. He asked for me. Because he wants to see you fail again. Because watching someone who's already lost everything stake what little credibility they have left is entertainment for people like Malcolm. Maybe. Or maybe he wants to see if I've learned anything." Ryan looked out the window at the city passing by. "Either way, it doesn't change what we need to do. The board will tear you apart if the evidence isn't airtight. Then we make it airtight." Ava was quiet for a moment. "Why are you really doing this, Ryan? And don't tell me it's about the money or stopping what happened to you from happening to someone else. I need the real reason." Ryan thought about Lily asking if he was going to try again. Thought about 3 years of making sandwiches and telling himself it was enough. Thought about Ava standing in the rain, seeing something in him that he'd forgotten was there. "Because you were right," he said finally. "I wasn't at that cart because I loved making sandwiches. I was there because it was safe, because no one could take it away from me. But safe isn't the same as alive, and I'm tired of being safe." Ava didn't respond, but when he glanced over, something in her expression had softened. They spent the rest of the day and most of the night preparing. Building slides, checking facts, running through Malcolm's likely questions and Patricia's likely defenses. By 3 a.m., they had something that looked like a case. By 4 a.m., Ryan was starting to doubt everything. "What if we're wrong?" he said, staring at the presentation for the 100th time. "What if Patricia's approval of Meridian was legitimate? What if Webb's recommendation was honest? What if we're seeing patterns that aren't there because we're looking for them?" Ava looked up from her laptop. She'd been reviewing the board's bylaws, looking for procedural angles. "Then we're wrong. But I don't think we are." "How do you know?" "Because of how you described it. The way they used your trust against you. The precision of the trap. That's not random. That's not coincidence." She paused. "And because Patricia looked scared today, not confused. Scared. People don't get scared when they're innocent." Ryan wanted to believe her, wanted to trust his own analysis, but doubt was a hard thing to shake once it settled in. "I need to go home," he said. "See Lily. Make sure she's okay." "It's 4 a.m. "I know, but if this goes wrong tomorrow, if I'm about to blow up my credibility in front of a room full of people who already think I'm a failure, I need to see her first." Ava studied him for a moment, then nodded. "The car's downstairs. Be back by 8. We'll do one final run-through before the meeting. Ryan gathered his things and headed for the elevator. As the doors were closing, Ava called out. Ryan? He held the door. Yeah? Thank you for doing this, for staking everything on it. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won. We haven't lost either. The apartment was dark and quiet when Ryan let himself in. He checked on Lily, asleep, one arm thrown over her stuffed dragon, the nightlight casting soft shadows on the walls. She looked so peaceful, so completely unaware that her father was about to walk into a room and accuse powerful people of crimes they'd carefully planned. He sat on the edge of her bed and watched her sleep, trying to memorize this moment. Whatever happened tomorrow, things were going to change. Either he'd prove the conspiracy and have to figure out what came next, or he'd fail publicly and have to explain to his daughter why Daddy had tried something hard and lost again. You should have a friend, she'd said. Maybe she was right. Maybe that's what Ava was becoming. Not a client, not an employer, but someone who saw him clearly and didn't look away. Ryan kissed Lily's forehead and stood to leave. As he reached the door, she stirred. Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Are you okay? I'm okay. Promise? He thought about lying, thought about saying everything was fine, that tomorrow was just another day, that nothing bad could happen. But Lily deserved better than comfortable lies. I'm scared, he said honestly, but I'm going to try something hard anyway. That's what being okay means sometimes. Will you tell me about it after? Every detail. She smiled sleepily and rolled over, already drifting back to sleep. Ryan left before he could change his mind about tomorrow, before the weight of what he was about to do could become too heavy to carry. The board meeting was at 10. Ryan had 8 hours to make sure he was ready. 8 hours to build a case that would either save Ava Sterling's company or destroy what little credibility he had left. He got in the car and headed back to Sterling Financial Tower, where Ava was waiting with coffee and the kind of determination that came from having everything to lose. Tomorrow, they'd find out if that was enough. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. Ryan understood that the moment he walked in at 9:45, 15 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The table was black marble, polished to a mirror finish. The chairs were leather, high-backed, positioned at exact intervals. The windows overlooked the city from 43 floors up, making everything below seem small and inconsequential. 12 seats. 11 board members plus Ava. Right now, only 3 were occupied. Malcolm Cross sat at the far end, reading something on his tablet, his face giving away nothing. Patricia Chen was 2 seats down, perfectly composed in a navy suit, her hands folded on the table in front of her. She looked up when Ryan entered, and for just a second, something flickered in her expression before the professional mask settled back into place. The third person was someone Ryan didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s, gray hair cut short, wearing glasses that made her look like she spent her time reading financial statements for fun. Mr. Carter, Malcolm said without looking up. You're early. Seemed like a good idea. Catherine Marks, the woman said, extending her hand. Independent director. I chair the audit committee. Her handshake was firm, evaluative. Ryan got the sense she'd already formed 3 opinions about him and was testing them against reality. Ryan Carter, consultant. I know who you are. I also know what happened to Technova Solutions. Sloppy due diligence on your investors, wasn't it? Among other things. Let's hope you've learned from that. Catherine returned to her papers, and Ryan took a seat near the presentation screen as far from Patricia as the room allowed. He pulled out his laptop and started running through the slides one more time, even though he'd memorized every word hours ago. The other board members filtered in over the next 10 minutes. David Reeves, head of European operations, looking tired and annoyed. Jonathan Pike, representing the largest institutional investor, checking his phone every 30 seconds. Sarah Chen, no relation to Patricia apparently, who ran a venture capital fund and had the aggressive energy of someone who'd made a fortune betting on things other people thought were impossible. Marcus Webb arrived at 9:58, 2 minutes before start time, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly rent. He didn't acknowledge Ryan directly, but his eyes swept the room with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how the next hour was going to play out. Ava came in last at exactly 10 o'clock, and the room's energy shifted. She moved to the head of the table, set down a leather portfolio, and waited for everyone to settle. Thank you all for being here, she said, I know some of you had to adjust your schedules. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'd like to address the compliance concerns that have been raised regarding our European division. That's why we're here, Jonathan Pike said, still half focused on his phone. The recommendation from the Compliance Committee is pretty clear. Temporary suspension of CEO authority pending investigation. Malcolm assumes interim leadership. We vote. We move forward. That recommendation is based on manufactured evidence, Ava said flatly. The room went very still. Patricia leaned forward slightly. That's a serious accusation, Ava. It's a serious situation, which is why I've asked Mr. Carter to present his findings. Some of you know his background. For those who don't, he built and lost a company under circumstances remarkably similar to what Sterling Financial is facing now. He spent the last 3 days analyzing our situation. 3 days, Marcus Webb said, his voice carrying just enough skepticism to sound reasonable. And in 3 days, he's uncovered a conspiracy that our own compliance team, our auditors, and our legal department all missed? Yes, Ryan said. Marcus turned to look at him directly for the first time. That's either brilliant or delusional. Which one should we believe? Give me 30 minutes and decide for yourself. Malcolm set down his tablet. You have 20. We all have other obligations. Ryan stood and moved to the presentation screen, pulling up the first slide. His hands weren't shaking. He'd checked twice, but his pulse was hammering hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. The compliance violations you're being asked to vote on don't exist, he began. What exists is a carefully constructed narrative designed to create the appearance of violations. The key is understanding how the narrative was built. He walked them through Transcorp Holdings, the ghost subsidiary that existed on paper but had no real business purpose. Showed them the wire transfers, 2 small ones to establish legitimacy, 1 large one 6 weeks ago. Demonstrated how the $800,000 had been distributed to 5 vendors in amounts too even to be coincidental. These vendors are real companies, Ryan continued, but the services they were supposedly hired for were never rendered. The procurement requests were approved by CFO Patricia Chen without the standard competitive bidding process, which is unusual for contracts of this size. Patricia's expression didn't change, but her fingers started tapping against the table. Ryan moved to the next slide, showing Meridian Consulting's corporate structure. Meridian Consulting was hired 18 months ago, also approved by Patricia Chen without competitive bidding. The company is registered in Dublin as a shell corporation. Its primary business appears to be serving as a reference for Marcus Webb, who consulted for Sterling Financial shortly after Meridian was brought on board. This is circumstantial, Marcus said calmly. Meridian is a legitimate firm. I've worked with them on multiple projects. I'm sure you have. Just like SecureNet is a legitimate company that happened to acquire the assets of the firm you recommended Sterling Financial pass on. Just like David Chen, Patricia's brother, is legitimately on SecureNet's board. Just like you legitimately destroyed my company using the exact same pattern you're using here. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. That's defamatory, Patricia said, her voice ice. It's accurate. You want to know how I know? Because I've lived it. Ryan pulled up a comparison slide showing Technova's compliance crisis next to Sterling Financial's. The patterns were nearly identical. Timing, structure, even some of the language in the regulatory filings. This isn't coincidence. This is methodology. Marcus Webb perfected this approach on my company. You've been implementing it here for 6 years, Patricia. Building credibility, learning the systems, positioning yourself for the moment when Ava became vulnerable enough to remove. This is absurd, Marcus said, but there was an edge in his voice now. You're a failed entrepreneur with a vendetta, spinning conspiracy theories. Then explain the vendor payments, Ryan interrupted. Explain why Transcorp Holdings received exactly 1 suspicious transfer in 4 years. Explain why Meridian Consulting's only verifiable client is you. Explain why every single element of this compliance crisis mirrors what happened to Technova. I don't have to explain anything to you. No. But you'll have to explain it to the SEC when they start asking questions about securities fraud. Malcolm raised his hand, cutting through the tension. Mr. Carter, you've made serious allegations. Where's the proof? Ryan had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it. But standing in front of 12 people who held Ava's future in their hands, he realized that preparation only got you so far. At some point, you had to trust that the truth was enough. The proof is in the pattern, he said. The proof is in the timing. The proof is in the fact that Marcus Webb called me yesterday and threatened my daughter when he realized we were investigating. The room erupted. That's a lie, Marcus said, standing up. Is it? Check your phone records. You called me at 2:47 p.m. yesterday from your personal cell. You mentioned my daughter by name. You mentioned her school. You offered to help with private school applications as a way of suggesting that continued investigation would be, how did you put it, messy. Marcus's face had gone red. I was trying to help. You're twisting. I'm repeating exactly what you said. Ryan pulled out his phone, set it on the table. I recorded the call. Would you like me to play it for the board? He hadn't actually recorded the call. The decision to bluff had been made at 3 a.m. when he and Ava were running through worst-case scenarios. But Marcus didn't know that, and the moment of hesitation before he responded told Ryan everything he needed to know. This is harassment, Patricia said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Malcolm, this meeting is out of order. We should vote on the original recommendation, and we'll vote when I say we vote, Malcolm said sharply. Mr. Carter, finish your presentation. Ryan moved through the remaining slides, showing the money trail, the corporate connections, the timeline that stretched back 6 years. With each piece of evidence, the story became clear. Not airtight, there were still gaps, still plausible alternative explanations, but clear enough that doubt was spreading through the room like smoke. When he finished, the silence was absolute. Catherine Marks was the first to speak. I have questions for Patricia. I don't have to answer. You absolutely do. You're the CFO. These transactions happened under your authority. Either you're complicit or you're incompetent. Which is it? Patricia's composure was cracking now, fine lines appearing in the professional facade. I approved vendors based on recommendations from our procurement team. If there were irregularities, they would have been flagged by our auditors. Unless the irregularities were designed to avoid automatic flags, Ryan said. Unless someone with deep institutional knowledge structured the transactions specifically to look routine until you examined them in aggregate. This is speculation, Marcus said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You're asking the board to destroy 2 reputations based on pattern recognition and a phone call that may or may not have been misinterpreted. I'm asking the board to delay a vote that will remove Ava from leadership based on compliance violations that don't exist, Ryan corrected. Table the suspension. Give us 2 weeks to complete a full forensic audit. If we're wrong, you lose nothing. If we're right, you save the company. Malcolm looked at Catherine, who nodded. Looked at Jonathan Pike, who'd finally put down his phone and was actually paying attention. Looked at Sarah Chen, who was studying Patricia with the focused intensity of someone calculating odds. We'll take a 15-minute recess, Malcolm said. Board members only. Mr. Carter, Miss Sterling, please wait outside. Ryan gathered his laptop and followed Ava into the hallway. The door closed behind them with a solid thunk, and suddenly they were alone in the quiet corridor, the boardroom's tension sealed away behind soundproof walls. You threatened to play a recording you don't have, Ava said. I know. That's a felony if they call the bluff. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment, and Ryan couldn't read her expression. Anger? Respect? Fear? Maybe all 3. Why did you really record the call? She asked quietly. I didn't. But Marcus doesn't know that, and his reaction told everyone in that room he's scared. Scared people make mistakes. Or they get dangerous. Before Ryan could respond, the boardroom door opened and Malcolm stepped out. We need to speak with Patricia alone, he said. Mr. Carter, you should know that 3 board members are calling for your immediate removal from this building. 2 others want to file a formal complaint. One thinks you're either brilliant or insane. Which one are you? Ryan asked. I'm the one who's suspending the compliance vote for 2 weeks pending a full forensic audit. Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You just bought yourself 14 days to prove you're not delusional. Malcolm paused. But if you're wrong, if this is a vendetta dressed up as analysis, I'll personally ensure you never work in this city again. Are we clear? Crystal. Malcolm went back inside and Ryan leaned against the wall, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. 3 days, maybe 12 hours of sleep total, running on coffee and adrenaline and the desperate hope that he wasn't about to destroy both their lives. We did it, Ava said softly. We bought time. That's not the same as winning. It's more than we had this morning. She was right, but Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just kicked a hornet's nest and the hornets were about to get organized. Marcus and Patricia were in that room right now, being questioned by people who suddenly didn't trust them. They'd either crack under pressure or they'd regroup and come back harder. The door opened again. This time it was Patricia who emerged, moving fast. Her face composed, but her eyes bright with something that looked like barely controlled fury. "This isn't over," she said as she passed them. "No," Ryan agreed. "It's not." She disappeared into the elevator, and Marcus followed 30 seconds later, not looking at either of them. When the elevator doors closed, Ava let out a breath she'd apparently been holding. That felt like a threat. That's because it was. Malcolm appeared in the doorway one more time. "Ava, the board wants to speak with you. Mr. Carter, you're dismissed. We'll contact you when we need you." Ava touched Ryan's arm briefly, just a moment of contact, but it carried weight, then followed Malcolm back into the boardroom. Ryan was alone in the corridor, 43 floors above a city that had chewed him up once before and might be preparing to do it again. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Kim, asking if he'd be home for dinner with Lily. He'd promised he would be, promised that no matter what happened, he'd be there to say goodnight, to read the dragon story, to be the kind of father who showed up even when everything else was falling apart. Ryan texted back that he'd be there by 6, then headed for the elevator. He made it home with 20 minutes to spare. Lily was at the kitchen table working on homework that involved drawing pictures of different shapes. She looked up when he walked in, and her face split into a smile that made the last 3 days almost worth it. "You came!" "Said I would." "But you're busy with the big project. Miss Rodriguez says when adults are busy, they forget about kids." Miss Rodriguez is cynical, also possibly right, but not this time. Ryan dropped his bag and sat down next to her. "What are we drawing?" "Rectangles, but I'm making them into buildings, see? This one's a castle. This one's a skyscraper like where you've been working." She'd drawn Sterling Financial Tower, or at least a child's version of it. Tall, imposing, with little windows and a flag on top. "That's good. What's the flag for?" "That's where the princess lives. Every building should have a princess." "What if it's a business building?" "Then it's a business princess, obviously." Ryan laughed, and it felt like the first real breath he'd taken in days. Obviously. "How was school?" Lily launched into a detailed explanation of how Tommy Henderson had finally remembered his recorder, but then played it so badly that everyone's ears hurt. How fractions were still terrible, but slightly less terrible than yesterday. How her friend Emma had brought cookies, but only shared them with people who'd been nice to her at recess, which Lily thought was fair, but also kind of mean. Normal 6-year-old concerns, normal 6-year-old logic. Ryan listened and made dinner, pasta with butter and cheese, Lily's favorite, and tried not to think about Marcus Webb's face when the recording bluff had landed. Tried not to think about Patricia's parting threat. Tried not to think about the fact that he'd just made enemies of 2 people who'd already destroyed him once. After dinner, after Lily's bath, after the dragon story where they were at the part where the dragon finally finds a friend who doesn't run away, Ryan tucked her in and sat on the edge of her bed. "Daddy?" "Yeah, Bug?" "Did you do the hard thing today?" He'd almost forgotten he'd told her he was going to try something hard. "Yeah, I did." "Was it scary?" "Very." "But you did it anyway?" "Yeah." She thought about this for a moment, her face serious in the nightlight's glow. "That's brave." "Or stupid. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." Ms. Rodriguez says brave and stupid look the same from the outside. The difference is on the inside. Ryan smiled despite himself. "Your teacher is very wise." "I know. Can I meet the business princess?" "What?" "The one you're helping. Can I meet her?" Ryan hadn't considered this possibility. Hadn't thought about what it would mean to bring Lily into this situation, to introduce her to Ava, to blur the lines between the life he'd built and the one he was temporarily inhabiting. "Maybe," he said carefully, "if the project works out." "Okay, but I think you should, because you seem less lonely now." The observation hit harder than it should have. Ryan kissed her forehead and stood up before she could see his expression. "Good night, Bug." "Good night, Daddy." He was washing dishes when his phone rang. Ava. "The board approved the forensic audit," she said without preamble. "Catherine Marks is overseeing it personally. She's bringing in an outside firm, no connection to Sterling Financial, reports directly to the board. We have 2 weeks. That's good. Patricia resigned an hour ago, effective immediately. She cited personal reasons and declined an exit interview. Ryan set down the dish he was holding. She's running, or regrouping. Marcus is still consulting on the Singapore deal, which gives him access to our systems for another 2 weeks. The board couldn't remove him without cause, and we don't have enough proof yet. So he stays close while the audit happens. Yes, which means he'll know what the investigators are finding in real time. He can cover tracks, destroy evidence, redirect attention. Ryan dried his hands and moved to the small desk where his laptop sat. Then we need to find something he can't cover, something that exists outside Sterling Financial's systems. Like what? Like the money. Webb and Chen didn't do this for fun. They did it for profit, which means somewhere there's a bank account or a shell company or a paper trail that shows them receiving funds from the scheme. If we can find that, we can prove criminal conspiracy, not just corporate malfeasance. Exactly. But we'll need help. Someone who understands international banking and shell company structures. Ava was quiet for a moment. I know someone. Former FBI, specialized in financial crimes. She went private 5 years ago. Expensive, but thorough. How expensive? More than you made selling sandwiches. Good thing I'm not paying her. Ryan. Ava's voice softened slightly. You should know that the board's approval came with conditions. The audit is limited to the European Division transactions. If it expands beyond that scope, or if the investigators want to look at other areas of the company, they need board approval. Malcolm made it very clear this is about verifying your specific claims, not launching a fishing expedition. Translation, they're protecting themselves in case we're wrong, or protecting the company in case we're right, and the problem is bigger than 2 people. Ryan hadn't considered that possibility. Hadn't thought about what it would mean if the rot went deeper than Webb and Patricia. How are you holding up? He asked. The question seemed to surprise her. There was a pause before she answered. I've been better. Patricia and I weren't friends exactly, but we worked together for 6 years. I trusted her judgment, her analysis, and the whole time she was... Ava stopped. I hate being wrong about people. You weren't wrong. You were lied to. There's a difference. Is there? I'm the CEO. I'm supposed to see these things. No one sees everything. That's why Webb's strategy works. He uses trust as a weapon. Makes you feel stupid for having it in the first place. Ava was quiet again, and Ryan wondered what she was thinking. Whether she was questioning her own judgment, or his, or the whole situation they'd gotten themselves into. Malcolm asked me if we're involved, she said finally. What? Romantically. He said you were defending me with more passion than a consultant typically shows. Asked if there was something I should disclose to the board. Ryan's brain stuttered to a halt. What did you tell him? That you're a professional doing a job. That anything beyond that was irrelevant to the audit. She paused. But he's not wrong that you're invested in this beyond what I'm paying you. I'm invested because I know what's at stake. Is that all? The question hung in the air between them. Ryan looked around his small apartment. The kitchen where he'd made thousands of sandwiches, the table where Lily did homework, the life he'd built from nothing that was safe and small and completely under his control. And then he thought about the boardroom, the way Ava had stood at the head of that table refusing to back down, the way she'd trusted him to present the case even though it put everything she'd built at risk, the way she'd touched his arm in the hallway, just for a second, like she needed to make sure he was real. I should go, he said, not answering. Lily's asleep and I need to prep for tomorrow. Tomorrow? If Patricia's running and Marcus is still in play, we're on a clock. Every day we don't find proof is a day they're destroying evidence or moving money. I'm meeting with your FBI contact at 8, unless you have a problem with that. No problem. I'll send you her information. Ava hesitated. Ryan, thank you for today, for not backing down when Marcus threatened you. He threatened my daughter. Backing down wasn't an option. Still, thank you. She hung up, and Ryan sat in the quiet apartment, staring at his phone. Malcolm had asked if they were involved. The answer should have been simple. No, they weren't. This was professional, nothing more. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that Ava Sterling had walked into his carefully controlled life and reminded him of who he used to be. Not the person who'd failed and lost everything, but the person before that. The one who'd built something. The one who'd believed problems could be solved if you were smart enough and worked hard enough. Ryan opened his laptop and started searching for information about shell companies and international money transfers. Started building a list of questions for the FBI consultant. Started preparing for the next phase of a fight that was far from over. Because Malcolm was right about one thing. Ryan was invested in this beyond what he was being paid. He just wasn't ready to examine why. The FBI consultant's name was Jennifer Torres, and she met Ryan at a coffee shop in Midtown at exactly 8 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of professional skepticism that came from years of watching people lie about money. "Ava says you're looking for hidden assets," she said after they'd ordered. "International shell companies, probably layered, probably moving money through multiple jurisdictions. That's the working theory. And you think Marcus Webb and Patricia Chen are sophisticated enough to set this up without leaving traces? I think they've done it before successfully. I think they're careful, but I also think everyone makes mistakes when they're moving this much money." Jennifer pulled out a tablet and stylus. "Walk me through what you know." Ryan spent 20 minutes laying out the case. Technova's collapse, the pattern at Sterling Financial, the vendor payments, the ghost subsidiary. Jennifer took notes, occasionally asking questions that suggested she was already several steps ahead of his analysis. When he finished, she sat back and studied her notes. If they're following a standard playbook, the money's probably in the Caymans or Belize, easy to set up, hard to crack without cooperation from local authorities. But Webb made a mistake. What mistake? He got greedy. $800,000 through Transcorp is too much for a simple pass-through. That kind of money creates tax implications, reporting requirements, paper trails. If he'd kept it under $300,000, he could have stayed under most automatic reporting thresholds. So you can find it? I can try, but it'll take time and it won't be cheap. We're talking about subpoenas, international requests, possibly hiring local investigators in multiple countries. Ava said money wasn't an issue, but I want you to understand what you're asking for. I understand. How long? 2 weeks minimum. Possibly longer if the shell companies are layered deep enough. We have exactly 2 weeks before the board expects results. Jennifer smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. Then I'd better get started. I'll need everything you have on Transcorp Holdings, Meridian Consulting, and any other corporate entities connected to Webb or Chen. Bank records, wire transfers, incorporation documents, everything. Ava can get you access. Good. One more thing. Jennifer leaned forward slightly. If we find what we're looking for, if we can prove Webb and Chen are hiding money, this becomes a criminal matter, not just corporate governance, actual fraud charges. Are you prepared for that? Ryan thought about Marcus Webb's voice on the phone, mentioning Lily's school. Thought about David Chen's face in the courtroom 3 years ago, calm and confident, knowing he'd already won. Thought about every night he'd spent making sandwiches instead of doing work that actually meant something. Yes, he said. I'm prepared for that. Jennifer nodded and stood. Then let's burn these people down. She left, and Ryan sat alone with his coffee, watching the city move through its morning routine outside the window. Commuters rushing, delivery trucks double parked, someone's life falling apart or coming together, all of it happening simultaneously in a space too crowded to process individually. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have taken my offer. Now things get complicated. M.W. Ryan stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Marcus wanted a reaction, wanted to know he'd gotten under Ryan's skin. But Ryan had learned a long time ago that the best response to intimidation was silence. He had 2 weeks to find proof, 2 weeks to stop Marcus Webb from doing to Ava what he'd done to Ryan. 2 weeks to prove that sometimes, when you tried hard things, you didn't lose. The next 13 days were a blur. Ryan effectively moved into Sterling Financial's offices, working 18-hour days, surviving on coffee, and the kind of focused intensity that came from having everything on the line. Jennifer Torres sent daily updates. Leads followed, dead ends hit, small discoveries that built towards something larger but not fast enough. Ava was there most of the time too, managing the company while simultaneously helping Ryan track down documents, authorize access, run interference with board members who were getting impatient. They fell into a rhythm, working separately but in parallel, occasionally meeting in the conference room to compare notes, share coffee, exist in each other's presence without needing to fill the silence. On day 7, Ryan went home at a reasonable hour and had dinner with Lily. She asked about the business princess again, and he found himself describing Ava without meaning to. Describing her precision, her intelligence, the way she faced problems head-on instead of avoiding them. "She sounds nice," Lily said. "She's complicated. Most interesting people are. Miss Rodriguez says simple people are boring. Miss Rodriguez should write a book." On day 9, Jennifer called with the first real breakthrough. She'd found a shell company in Belize, Cascade Holdings, that had received wire transfers from 3 of the 5 vendors paid by Transcorp. The amounts didn't match exactly, but the timing was perfect. Money went out from Sterling Financial, moved through Transcorp to the vendors, then 30% came back to Cascade within 72 hours. "Who owns Cascade?" Ryan asked. "That's the interesting part. The registered agent is a law firm in Panama. The beneficial owner is listed as another shell company in the British Virgin Islands. I'm working on penetrating that layer now." "How long?" "Maybe 3 days, maybe less if I can get cooperation from the BVI authorities." 3 days would put them at day 12, 2 days before the board meeting. Ryan relayed this to Ava, who was reviewing quarterly projections at her desk. "That's cutting it close," she said. "It's all we have." She set down her pen and looked at him directly. "What happens if Jennifer doesn't find the proof in time?" "Then we go to the board with what we have and hope it's enough." "It won't be. Malcolm's already asking questions about the audit's progress. He wants hard evidence, not sophisticated theories." "Then we get him hard evidence." "How?" Ryan had been thinking about this for days, turning over possibilities in his mind during the moments when he should have been sleeping. "We make Marcus nervous," he said finally. "We let him know we're close to finding the money. Make him think we're about to expose him. Nervous people make mistakes. That's dangerous. If he realizes we're bluffing, I'm not talking about bluffing. I'm talking about showing him just enough to make him think we know more than we do. Make him choose between cutting his losses and trying to cover his tracks. Either way, he makes a move we can see." Ava considered this, her finger doing that familiar tapping rhythm against the desk. "How do we show him without revealing we don't have everything yet? We use me. He already thinks I'm obsessed with revenge. I reach out, say I want to meet, say I have questions about Technova that might be relevant to Sterling Financial's situation. He'll either ignore me or he'll meet because he wants to know what I know. And if he meets, then I push him. See where he pushes back, see what he's protecting. That's not a plan, that's improvisation. Sometimes improvisation is all you have." Ava stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. It was past midnight, and the office was empty except for the 2 of them and the cleaning crew somewhere on a lower floor. "Malcolm asked me again if we're involved," she said without turning around. Ryan went very still. "What did you say?" "I said the same thing as last time, that you're a professional doing a job." She turned to face him. "But I'm starting to wonder if that's true. For either of us." The air in the room felt suddenly thinner. "Ava, you've been here every day for almost 2 weeks. You barely go home. You're not doing this for the money anymore, if you ever were. So why are you really here, Ryan?" He could have deflected. Could have made it about justice or redemption or stopping Webb from hurting someone else. All of those things were true, but they weren't the whole truth. "Because when I'm here, I remember who I used to be," he said quietly. "Before everything fell apart. Before I convinced myself that making sandwiches was enough. You asked me once why I was really doing this. The truth is I'm doing it because you saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there." Ava didn't respond immediately. She just stood there, backlit by the city, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We should focus on the board meeting," she said finally. "Personal complications can wait." Agreed. But something had shifted in the room, some acknowledgement of something that neither of them was ready to name. Ryan sent the message to Marcus Webb the next morning. "Need to talk about Technova. Might be relevant to your current work. Coffee?" The response came 2 hours later. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. You know where." Ryan did know where. The same coffee shop where he and Jennifer Torres had met. Neutral ground. Public enough to feel safe, quiet enough to talk. He spent the rest of the day preparing, not notes, because notes would make it look planned, but mental frameworks. questions to ask, reactions to watch for. The goal wasn't to get Marcus to confess. The goal was to make him worried enough to do something stupid. The next morning, Ryan arrived 15 minutes early and took a table in the back. Marcus showed up exactly on time, looking relaxed and confident in a way that suggested he thought this meeting was his idea. "Ryan," he said, sitting down without ordering anything, "I'm surprised you reached out. I've been thinking about Technova, about what you and David Chen did. We've been over this. Your company failed because of poor management and inadequate controls. What we did was recognize those problems before they became catastrophic. No. What you did was create those problems, then profit when I couldn't fix them fast enough. The same way you're creating problems at Sterling Financial." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're still obsessed with this conspiracy theory. It's sad, really. You built something, you lost it, and now you can't accept that it was your own fault. I know it was my fault. I trusted you. That was my mistake. But I'm curious about something." "What's that?" "When you moved the money after Technova collapsed and you sold the patents to SecureNet, where did you put it? Caymans? Belize? Somewhere more creative?" Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. You're too smart to profit from fraud without hiding the money properly. I'm just trying to understand the mechanism, for professional curiosity." "This conversation is over." Marcus stood to leave, and Ryan knew he had maybe 5 seconds before the moment was gone. "Cascade Holdings," Ryan said quietly. Marcus froze. "That's where the Sterling Financial money is going, right? Through Transcorp, through the vendors, into Cascade. 30% kickback within 72 hours. It's elegant, really. But you made a mistake. You're fishing. You don't have anything. Maybe, or maybe I have everything and I'm just waiting for the right moment to show it to the board." Ryan stood, facing Marcus across the small table. "You called me 10 days ago and threatened my daughter. That was your mistake, because now this isn't about money or companies. It's about making sure you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." Marcus leaned in close enough that Ryan could smell his expensive cologne. "You have no idea what you're playing with," he said, his voice low and hard. "You think finding Cascade matters? I'll close it tomorrow and open 10 more you'll never find. You think the board will believe you? They'll believe whoever makes them the most money. And right now, that's not Ava Sterling. We'll see." "Yes, we will." Marcus stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Enjoy the next 48 hours, Ryan, because after the board meeting, you're going back to your sandwich cart, and Ava's going to learn the same lesson you did. That trust is a liability in this world." He left, and Ryan sat back down, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. He'd gotten what he needed. Not a confession, Marcus was too smart for that, but confirmation. Confirmation that Cascade mattered. Confirmation that Marcus was worried. Confirmation that they were close enough to make him defensive. Ryan pulled out his phone and called Jennifer Torres. "I just rattled Marcus Webb. He's going to move money or close accounts in the next 24 hours. Can you track that? If he does it through normal channels, maybe. If he's smart, he'll use cash or cryptocurrency or some method I can't monitor remotely. He's smart, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's 10 steps ahead of everyone. Then let's hope arrogance makes him sloppy." Ryan hung up and texted Ava. "Webb knows we're close. He's going to move. Tell Catherine Marks to watch for any unusual financial activity in the next 24 hours. Her response was immediate. "On it. Are you okay?" He stared at the question for a moment, then typed, "Yeah. Meet you at the office in an hour. We need to prepare for Endgame." Because that's what this was now. Endgame. Either they found proof in the next 36 hours, or they walked into the board meeting with theories and patterns and a recording that might not exist. Ryan paid for his coffee and headed for Sterling Financial Tower, where Ava was waiting, and the clock was ticking, and everything he'd built over the last 2 weeks was about to be tested. The city moved around him, indifferent, relentless, full of people whose lives were falling apart or coming together in ways they might not recognize until years later. Ryan understood that now. Understood that the moment when everything changed wasn't always obvious when it was happening. Sometimes it looked like a woman buying a sandwich in the rain. Sometimes it looked like a man deciding to try one more time, even though he'd already lost everything. And sometimes it looked like two people working through the night, searching for proof that would save or destroy them both, neither quite willing to admit that what they were really doing was learning to trust again. Jennifer Torres called at 11 p.m. that night, her voice tight with the kind of controlled excitement that came from finding something you'd almost given up on. "He moved it," she said without preamble. Webb transferred funds out of Cascade Holdings at 4:47 this afternoon, $840,000, split across 3 new accounts in Singapore. Ryan was at his apartment, Lily asleep in the next room, his laptop open to financial documents he'd been reviewing for the 100th time. He sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. "Can you trace the Singapore accounts?" "I'm already tracing them. But here's the interesting part. He didn't use his usual law firm to set them up. He went direct, personally established the accounts using a local agent in Singapore. That's sloppy. That's the kind of mistake people make when they're panicking. Can we prove the accounts belong to him?" "Not yet. The beneficial owner is listed as a trust, and the trust documentation is sealed. But I pulled Webb's travel records through a contact at TSA. He flew to Singapore 6 months ago, stayed 3 days, flew back. 3 days later, the trust was established." Ryan's mind was racing, clicking pieces together. That's circumstantial. It's a pattern, and patterns become proof when you stack enough of them. I've also been looking at David Chen's financial history. Turns out he made a very similar trip to Singapore 8 months before Webb did. Different trust, different accounts, but the same local agent. They've been planning this for over a year. Longer, probably. This kind of infrastructure takes time, but they're scared now, Ryan. Webb moving the money today proves he knows you're close. Scared people make more mistakes. We have 36 hours until the board meeting. Is that enough time to prove the Singapore accounts connect to Webb? Jennifer was quiet for a moment, and Ryan could hear typing in the background. "Maybe. I have a contact at the Monetary Authority of Singapore who owes me a favor. If I can get access to the account activity logs, I can show that the money from Cascade went directly into these trusts. That plus Webb's travel records plus the timing might be enough." "Might be? That's the best I can give you. Financial forensics isn't like DNA evidence. It's about building a case piece by piece until the only reasonable explanation is the one you're presenting. We're close, but close isn't the same as certain." Ryan rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones. "Do what you can. Send me everything you find as soon as you find it." "Will do." "And Ryan, you should know that if we do prove this, if we can show Webb and Chen have been systematically defrauding Sterling Financial, this becomes a federal case. FBI will get involved. Maybe SEC. These aren't people who go quietly." "I know." "Do you? Because once this door opens, there's no closing it. Webb will come after you with everything he has. Legal action, reputation destruction, anything he can use. Are you ready for that?" Ryan thought about Lily sleeping in the next room. Thought about the small life he'd built that was safe and predictable and completely under his control. Thought about what it would mean to blow that up again, to invite chaos back in, to risk everything on the chance that this time, the truth would actually matter. "I'm ready," he said. After Jennifer hung up, Ryan sat in the quiet apartment and tried to convince himself that was true. Tried to believe that he was making the right choice, that protecting Ava and stopping Webb was worth the risk of losing the fragile stability he'd spent 3 years building. His phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "Still awake?" "Unfortunately, you?" "Can't sleep, too much in my head. Jennifer called you?" "Yeah, Webb moved the money. She's tracking it." "I know. She called me right after you. Malcolm also called. He's getting pressure from other board members to resolve this before the meeting. They don't like uncertainty." Ryan could read between those lines. The board wanted a clean answer. Either Ava was incompetent and needed to be removed, or Webb was a criminal and needed to be prosecuted. The messy middle ground where they'd been living for 2 weeks was becoming uncomfortable. "What did you tell him?" Ryan asked. "That we'd have answers by tomorrow night." That seemed to satisfy him, for now. There was a pause, then another message. "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah?" "Why did you really go back to making sandwiches? After Technova collapsed, you could have done a lot of things. Consulting, teaching, even just getting a regular job. Why that specifically?" Ryan stared at the question for a long moment. No one had asked him this directly before, not even Lily in her 6-year-old wisdom. He typed slowly. Because it was the only thing I could control completely. No investors to trust, no partners to betray me, no complexity that could be used against me, just sandwiches and customers and simple transactions that meant exactly what they appeared to mean. That sounds lonely. It was safe. Same thing sometimes. She was right, and Ryan didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to explain that safety had been the only thing that mattered after losing everything. That rebuilding from nothing required shrinking his world down to a size where failure wasn't catastrophic. "You should sleep," he typed finally. "Tomorrow's going to be long." "So should you." "I will, soon." But he didn't. He sat up until 2 a.m., reviewing documents, building timelines, preparing for a board meeting that would either vindicate everything he'd done or prove that he'd learned nothing from his first failure. At some point, he must have fallen asleep at the desk, because he woke up to Lily shaking his shoulder. "Daddy, you're going to be late for work." Ryan checked the time, 7:15 a.m. He had 45 minutes to get Lily ready for school and himself to Sterling Financial for a final preparation session before the 10 a.m. board meeting. "Thanks, Bug. What do you want for breakfast?" "Can we have pancakes?" "We don't have time for pancakes." "Then why did you ask what I want?" Fair point. Ryan made pancakes, fast, slightly burned, but technically pancakes, while Lily got dressed. She came out wearing her favorite purple shirt and mismatched socks, looking proud of herself for getting ready without help. "Are you doing the hard thing again today?" she asked through a mouthful of pancake. "Yeah, the hardest part." "Will you win?" "I don't know, Bug. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose." Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone whose biggest losses so far involved playground games and spelling tests. "But you're still going to try." "Yeah, I'm still going to try." "Then that's kind of like winning." Miss Rodriguez says, I know, Ms. Rodriguez is very wise." Ryan cleared the plates and grabbed his bag. "Come on, Mrs. Kim's waiting downstairs." He dropped Lily with Mrs. Kim, who gave him a knowing look that suggested she understood something important was happening, even if she didn't know the details. Then he caught a cab to Sterling Financial, watching the city wake up around him one more time. This might be the last morning he made this trip. After today, he'd either be someone who'd helped save a company or someone who'd spectacularly failed twice in public. There wasn't much middle ground. Ava was already in his conference room when he arrived, looking like she'd slept about as much as he had. 2 cups of coffee sat on the table, and she pushed one toward him without speaking. "Jennifer sent her final report 20 minutes ago," Ava said, pulling up her laptop. "She got the account activity logs from Singapore. The money from Cascade went directly into 3 trusts established 6 months ago. The trust's beneficial owners are sealed, but the local agent who set them up is the same one Webb used. She also found communication between the agent and an email address registered to a shell company that lists Marcus Webb as its director." Ryan felt something settle in his chest. Not quite relief, but close. That's proof. Not ironclad, but enough. Maybe. Catherine Marks reviewed it this morning. She said it's compelling but circumstantial. Without access to the trust documents showing Webb as the beneficial owner, we can't definitively prove the money is his. Can we get access to the trust documents? Not in the next 3 hours. Singapore's banking privacy laws are strict. We'd need a court order, which requires time and jurisdictional cooperation we don't have. Ryan walked to the window, staring out at the city that had watched him fail once before and was about to watch him gamble everything again. "Then we go with what we have," he said. "We show the board the pattern, the travel records, the money movement, the timing, the connections. We make the circumstantial evidence so overwhelming that the only reasonable conclusion is guilt. And if they don't see it that way, then I failed. Again, but at least this time I tried." Ava stood and moved next to him at the window. They were close enough that Ryan could see the exhaustion in her face, the fine lines around her eyes that suggested 2 weeks of working 18-hour days and carrying the weight of a company on her shoulders. "I meant what I said the other night," she said quietly, "about wondering why you're really here. I think I know now." "Yeah?" "You're here because someone saw you, actually saw you, not just the failure or the sandwich cart or the surface-level story, and that made you remember that you're more than what happened to you." Ryan didn't trust himself to speak. The observation hit too close to something he'd been carefully not examining. "For what it's worth," Ava continued, "I'm glad you remembered. Whatever happens today, I'm glad you were here. Before Ryan could respond, the conference room door opened and Malcolm Cross walked in, followed by Catherine Marks and 3 other board members. "We're starting early," Malcolm said, not bothering with pleasantries. "The full board will convene at 10, but the compliance committee wants to review your evidence first. If it's not compelling, we're voting to suspend your authority, Ava. Nothing personal, just business." Ava's expression went carefully neutral. "Of course. Ryan, you ready?"
"Yeah, I'm ready."
They spent the next 90 minutes presenting to 5 board members who interrupted constantly, challenged every assumption, and demanded explanations for gaps that couldn't be filled. Ryan walked them through Transcorp, Meridian, Cascade, the Singapore accounts, the travel records, the timing, the pattern that had been refined over years and used on multiple companies. Catherine Marks asked the hardest questions. "Let's say you're right," she said when Ryan finished. "Let's say Marcus Webb and Patricia Chen orchestrated this entire scheme. Why? What's their endgame?" "Same as it was with Technova," Ryan said. "Create a crisis that makes selling the company seem rational. Webb positions himself or his associates as buyers. They acquire Sterling Financial's assets at a discount, profit from the acquisition, and move on to the next target. That requires extraordinary coordination."
Yes, which is why it works. Nobody wants to believe people are capable of that level of systematic deception. Malcolm tapped his pen against his tablet, a rhythmic sound that filled the silence. "Your theory requires us to believe that our CFO spent 6 years building credibility just to steal from us. That a consultant we trusted and paid well betrayed that trust for profit. That's a lot to accept."
"I understand that, but Patricia resigned the moment we started asking questions. Webb moved money out of Cascade within hours of me mentioning it to him. Those aren't the actions of innocent people. Or they're the actions of people who know they're being falsely accused and want to distance themselves from a witch hunt." Ryan had known this was coming, had prepared for it, but hearing the skepticism spoken aloud still made his chest tight. "Then explain the Singapore accounts," he said. "Explain why Webb traveled there 6 months ago and 3 days later trusts were established that received money from Sterling Financial's fraudulent transactions. Explain the pattern that matches Technova exactly." "Coincidence," Malcolm said flatly. "Or confirmation bias. You see patterns because you're looking for them. That's not—"
"Mr. Carter," Catherine Marks held up a hand, "I appreciate the work you've done, truly. But Malcolm's right that we need more than patterns. We need definitive proof that Marcus Webb beneficially owns those Singapore accounts. Without that, this is just sophisticated speculation." The room went quiet. Ryan looked at Ava, who was staring at the table with an expression that suggested she was running calculations and not liking the results. "We don't have that proof," Ryan admitted. "Not yet. But if you give us more time—" "We've given you 2 weeks," Malcolm interrupted. "That's 14 days more than most people get to defend themselves against compliance violations. The full board meets in 30 minutes. At that meeting, we're voting on Ava's suspension. The evidence you've presented isn't enough to stop that vote."
Ryan felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, of watching something slip away despite doing everything possible to hold on. "Malcolm, please," Ava started. "I'm sorry, Ava, I genuinely am. But this company can't function in a state of perpetual uncertainty. Either we trust our compliance systems or we don't. Right now, those systems are telling us there were irregularities on your watch. Mr. Carter has raised questions about whether those irregularities were manufactured, but questions aren't answers." The other board members nodded, and Ryan knew they'd lost. Could see it in their faces, in the way they were already gathering their things, already moving mentally to the next agenda item. Catherine Marks stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Carter, I believe you. I think Webb and Chen are exactly what you say they are. But belief isn't enough in a boardroom. Evidence is. And you don't have enough of it." She left, and the others followed until it was just Ryan and Ava in the conference room, sitting in the ruins of 2 weeks of work. "I'm sorry," Ryan said. "I thought we had enough. I thought you did everything you could, more than anyone else would have. That doesn't change the outcome." Ava was quiet for a moment, staring at the presentation slides still displayed on the screen. The Transcorp transactions, the Meridian connections, the Singapore accounts that prove so much and yet somehow not enough. "The vote's in 30 minutes, she said finally. "After that, Malcolm becomes interim CEO.
The first thing he'll do is settle the compliance investigation quietly, probably pay a fine, restructure a few departments, move on. Within 6 months, the board will recommend selling to whoever makes the best offer. And that buyer will probably be connected to Webb. Probably, which means he wins. Again, Ryan wanted to argue, wanted to find some angle they'd missed, some piece of evidence that would change everything. But he'd spent 2 weeks looking for exactly that, and there was nothing left to find. "What will you do?" he asked. "I don't know. Take some time. Figure out what comes next. I've been running companies since I was 25. Maybe it's time to do something else." "You don't mean that, don't I?" Ava looked at him directly, and he could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. "I'm tired, Ryan. Tired of fighting. Tired of watching people I trust betray me. Tired of being the person who always has to be strong and certain and 5 steps ahead of everyone else." "So you're just going to let Webb win? Let him take everything you built?" "What choice do I have? You said it yourself. We don't have enough proof. Malcolm's right that the company can't function in uncertainty. Maybe the best thing I can do is step aside gracefully and let someone else deal with it." Ryan stood up, suddenly angry in a way he hadn't been since Technova collapsed. "No, that's not the best thing. That's the easy thing. And you're not someone who does easy things." "You don't know what I am. I know you stood in front of a board 2 weeks ago and refused to back down when everyone else would have folded. I know you trusted a guy selling sandwiches to help save your company because you saw something worth saving. I know you're not the kind of person who walks away just because things get hard. Maybe I should be that person. Maybe fighting isn't always worth it. And maybe sometimes fighting is the only thing worth doing." They stood facing each other across the conference table, and Ryan realized they weren't just arguing about the board vote anymore. They were arguing about something bigger, about whether trying and failing was better than not trying at all, about whether trust was worth the risk of betrayal, about whether people could actually change, or if they were doomed to repeat the same patterns forever. The door opened and Malcolm stuck his head in. 5 minutes. Board's assembling." He left, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. "I can't do this again," Ava said quietly. "Can't walk into a room and watch people who I thought respected me vote to remove me. I did that once at my first company, and I swore I'd never let it happen again." "Then don't let it happen. Fight back." "With what? We're out of evidence, out of time, out of options." Ryan's phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer Torres. "Call me, now. Found something." He showed the screen to Ava, and for the first time in 20 minutes, something like hope flickered across her face. Ryan dialed, putting the phone on speaker. "Tell me you have good news." "I have weird news," Jennifer said, speaking fast. "I've been running background on the Singapore agent who set up Webb's trusts. Standard due diligence. Turns out he's been under investigation by the Monetary Authority of Singapore for the past 8 months for helping clients hide assets. The investigation is sealed, but I have a contact who confirmed the agent's been cooperating with authorities." "Meaning what?" "Meaning if Singapore authorities are investigating him, they likely have access to all the trust documents he created, including beneficial owner information, which means somewhere in Singapore's regulatory files, there's documentation proving Marcus Webb owns those accounts." Ryan's heart rate kicked up. "Can we access those files?" "Not easily. They're part of an active investigation, which means they're protected. But if we can convince Singapore authorities that those trust documents are relevant to a U.S. fraud case, they might share them through official channels." "We don't have time for official channels. The vote is in 4 minutes." "I know, which is why I already called in another favor. I have a friend at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan who specializes in international financial crimes. If we can show him enough preliminary evidence to suggest cross-border fraud, he can make an emergency request to Singapore for the documents." "How long would that take?" "Under normal circumstances? Weeks. But if he marks it urgent and files it as part of a potential federal investigation, Singapore might respond in hours, maybe faster." Ava leaned toward the phone. "Jennifer, this is Ava. What do we need to do?" "Get the board to delay the vote. Give me until tomorrow morning. If Singapore comes through, we'll have definitive proof. If they don't, you're no worse off than you are now." "Malcolm won't delay without a reason." "Then give him a reason. Tell him federal investigators are involved. Tell him delaying protects the company from potential obstruction charges. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, but buy me 12 hours. Ava looked at Ryan, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded. "We try. One more time."
Jennifer hung up, and they had 90 seconds to get to the boardroom where 11 people were waiting to vote on Ava's future. They made it with 30 seconds to spare. The room was packed now. All 12 board members, plus legal counsel, plus the head of compliance. The air felt thick with anticipation, with the weight of decisions about to be made. Malcolm called the meeting to order. We're here to vote on the Compliance Committee's recommendation to temporarily suspend CEO authority pending completion of the European Division investigation. Before we vote, does anyone have final comments? Ava stood. I'm requesting a 24-hour delay. The room erupted in conversation. Malcolm banged his pen on the table like a gavel. On what grounds? On the grounds that this situation has escalated beyond internal compliance. As of an hour ago, the U.S. Attorney's Office has been briefed on potential international fraud involving sterling financial assets. Federal investigators are now involved. If this board votes to remove me before allowing federal authorities to complete their initial review, you're potentially exposing the company to obstruction charges. Malcolm's expression went very flat. You brought in federal investigators without board approval? I brought in investigators because evidence suggests systematic fraud that crosses international borders. That's not a compliance issue. That's a criminal matter. This is highly irregular, Ava. So is having your CFO resign the moment questions are raised. So is having a consultant transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars out of suspicious accounts within hours of being confronted. None of this is regular, Malcolm, which is exactly why we need time to let federal authorities review the evidence. Catherine Marks leaned forward. What federal authorities specifically? Ryan stood, pulling up Jennifer's credentials on his laptop and projecting them on the screen. Jennifer Torres, former FBI Financial Crimes Division, now consulting with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan. She's been investigating the Singapore accounts connected to Marcus Webb. She's also coordinating with the Monetary Authority of Singapore to access sealed trust documents that show beneficial ownership. And how long will this take? Malcolm asked. 24 hours, maybe less. And if these federal investigators don't find anything, then we vote tomorrow and I accept whatever decision the board makes, Ava said. But if there's even a chance that voting today exposes Sterling Financial to federal obstruction charges, can you really justify that risk? The room went quiet. Ryan could see board members exchanging glances, running their own calculations, weighing the political and legal implications. Jonathan Pike spoke up. I move to table the vote for 24 hours pending review by federal authorities. Second, Catherine Marks said immediately. Malcolm looked like he'd swallowed something bitter, but he nodded. All in favor? 8 hands went up, 3 stayed down. Motion carries. We reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ava, if federal authorities don't produce actionable evidence by then, we vote. No more delays. Understood. The board members filed out, some looking relieved, others annoyed, all of them clearly ready to be done with this situation. When the room finally emptied, it was just Ryan and Ava again, standing in the aftermath of a delay that felt both like victory and like simply postponing the inevitable. We have 24 hours, Ava said. Yeah. What if Jennifer doesn't come through? Then we lose. Cleanly this time. No more delays, no more investigations. Just a vote and whatever comes after. Ava nodded slowly, accepting this. I should call Jennifer, make sure she has everything she needs. I'll start documenting everything we have. If federal investigators do get involved, they'll want complete files. They moved to separate corners of the conference room and worked in focused silence for the next 3 hours. At some point, someone brought food that neither of them ate. At another point, the sun set outside the windows, and the city lights came on. Millions of lives continuing their ordinary paths while Ryan and Ava sat in a conference room betting everything on a phone call from Singapore. At 9 p.m., Ryan's phone rang. Lily. Hey, Bug. Daddy, you missed dinner again. Guilt hit him hard. He'd promised he'd be home by 6, had told Mrs. Kim he'd definitely make it this time. I know, I'm sorry, the project got complicated. Is the business princess okay? Ryan glanced at Ava, who was on her own call across the room. She's had a hard day, but she's fighting. Are you helping her fight? Trying to. Then you're being a good friend. Miss Rodriguez says that's what matters. Lily paused. Will you be home to say goodnight? Ryan checked his watch. If he left now, he could make it home by 9:45. read her the dragon story, be back at the office by 10:30. Yeah, I'll be there in 30 minutes. Promise? Promise. He hung up and caught Ava's attention. I need to go home for an hour. Say goodnight to Lily. Of course, go. I'll call if Jennifer has news. Ryan grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. As he waited for it to arrive, Ava called after him. Ryan? He turned. Thank you for not giving up, even when I wanted to. Thank you for giving me a reason not to. The elevator arrived and Ryan stepped in, watching Ava disappear as the doors closed. Then he was dropping 43 floors, emerging into a city that was just starting its evening, heading home to a daughter who deserved better than a father who kept breaking promises. But when he got there, when Lily opened the door and threw her arms around him like he'd been gone for weeks instead of hours, Ryan realized that maybe he'd been getting it wrong all along. Maybe the hard thing wasn't choosing between the safe life and the complicated one. Maybe the hard thing was learning to live in both at the same time. He read Lily the dragon story, tucked her in, promised he'd be there for breakfast, and caught a cab back to Sterling Financial Tower. Ava was still in the conference room, staring at her laptop screen with an intensity that suggested she'd been looking at the same document for an hour. Anything from Jennifer? Ryan asked. She filed the emergency request with Singapore at 8 p.m. their time. That was 2 hours ago. She said if they're going to respond quickly, we'll hear something before midnight our time. Ryan checked his watch. 10:47 p.m. They had just over an hour. And if we don't hear anything, then we walk into that boardroom tomorrow with the same evidence we have now and hope it's enough. Ava closed her laptop and looked at him directly. But I don't think it will be. Malcolm's made up his mind, so have most of the others. They want this resolved, and the easiest resolution is removing me. That's not a resolution, that's surrender. Sometimes surrender is the smart choice. You don't believe that. How do you know what I believe? Because I've spent 2 weeks watching you fight for this company. I've seen how you operate, how you think, how you refuse to accept defeat until every possible option is exhausted. That's not someone who surrenders. Ava smiled, but it was sad around the edges. You see a version of me that might not be real. The confident CEO who always knows what to do. But the truth is I'm terrified most of the time. Terrified of failing, terrified of trusting the wrong people, terrified that everything I've built is one mistake away from collapsing. That's not weakness. That's being human. Is it? Because it feels like weakness. Feels like I should be stronger. Should have seen Patricia and Webb coming. Should have protected the company better. Ryan moved to sit next to her, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. I blame myself for Technova for a long time, he said. Thought I should have been smarter, more careful, less trusting. Spent 3 years making sandwiches because that was punishment I deserved for failing. But you know what I learned? What? That beating yourself up for being human doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you smaller. And the world has enough small, scared people. It needs people who are willing to try hard things even when they're terrified. Ava was quiet for a long moment, and Ryan wondered if he'd said too much, if he'd crossed some line that existed between consultant and client, between professional distance and something more complicated. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically, not romantically, just a simple gesture of connection from someone who was tired and scared and grateful not to be facing the next 12 hours alone. Ryan squeezed back, and they sat in silence, waiting for a phone call that would either save or destroy everything they'd built. At 11:43 p.m., Jennifer called. Singapore came through, she said, her voice electric. They're sending the trust documents, full beneficial owner disclosure. I'm looking at them right now. Ryan put her on speaker, his heart hammering. What do they show? 3 trusts, all established 6 months ago through the same agent who's under investigation. The beneficial owner of all 3 is listed as Marcus Webb. Not a shell company, not a proxy. His name, his passport number, his residential address. It's definitive. Ava's hand tightened on Ryan's. Can you send us the documents? She asked. Already in your inbox. Along with account transaction histories showing the Cascade funds flowing in, along with verification from the Singapore agent, who's cooperating with authorities, that Webb personally instructed the account setup. Ryan pulled up Ava's email on his laptop. The files were there. PDFs with official monetary authority of Singapore headers, scanned trust documents, account statements, everything they needed. "This is admissible in court?" he asked. "It's part of an active regulatory investigation, which means it's protected disclosure. You can present it to your board, you can share it with federal investigators, and if this goes to trial, it's absolutely admissible." Ryan looked at Ava, who was staring at the screen with an expression somewhere between relief and disbelief. "We have proof," she said quietly. "You have everything," Jennifer confirmed. "Webb and Chen set up a systematic fraud scheme, moved company money through shell companies and fake vendors, and hid the proceeds in Singapore accounts under their own names. It's airtight. The U.S. Attorney's Office is already preparing charges. How long until they file? 48 hours, maybe less. They'll need to coordinate with Singapore authorities and SEC, but this is moving fast now." After Jennifer hung up, Ryan and Ava sat in the quiet conference room, staring at the documents that changed everything. "We did it," Ava said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "You did it. You refused to give up even when everyone else wanted you to." "We did it together." She turned to face him fully. "I couldn't have done this without you. Wouldn't have even tried without you. Don't minimize what you did. You saw the pattern when no one else could. You had the courage to present it even though everyone thought you were wrong. You stood in front of a board and risked being publicly humiliated again because you believed the truth mattered." She paused. "That's not nothing, Ryan. That's everything." They were close now, close enough that Ryan could see the exhaustion and relief and something else in her eyes. Something that looked like the same complicated emotion that was currently making his chest tight and his thoughts scattered. "The board meets in 10 hours, he said, his voice rougher than intended. "I know. We should probably prepare, run through how to present this." "Probably." But neither of them moved. Neither of them looked away. The city hummed outside the windows, 43 floors below, full of people who had no idea that in this room, in this moment, two people were discovering that sometimes trust wasn't a weakness. Sometimes it was the only thing worth betting everything on. Ava's phone buzzed, breaking the moment. She checked it and smiled slightly. "Malcolm, asking if we have anything new to present tomorrow." "What are you going to tell him?" "That he should prepare for a very interesting meeting." She typed a response, and Ryan stood, moving back to his laptop, suddenly needing the professional distance that had vanished somewhere in the last 5 minutes. They spent the next 2 hours organizing the Singapore documents into a presentation that would be impossible to dismiss. By 2 a.m., they had something devastating. By 3 a.m., they'd rehearsed it enough that Ryan could deliver it half asleep. "You should go home," Ava said finally. "Get a few hours of rest." "So should you." "I'm staying here. I need to be ready." "Then I'm staying too." Ava looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded. They set alarms for 7 a.m., claimed opposite ends of the conference room's leather couch, and tried to sleep. Ryan woke at 6:30 to find Ava already awake, standing at the window, watching the sunrise. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Kept running through scenarios. What happens after today?" "After we win, you mean?" "If we win, there's still a vote." "Not really, not anymore. Once the board sees this evidence, once they understand that voting against you means voting to protect criminals, they won't have a choice." Ava turned to face him. "And then what? Webb and Chen get arrested, Patricia disappears, the company survives, and you go back to your sandwich cart?" The question hung in the air between them. "I don't know," Ryan said honestly. "I haven't thought past today." "Maybe you should." Before he could respond, Ava's phone rang. Malcolm, calling early. "The U.S. Attorney's Office just contacted me," he said without preamble. "They're recommending we delay the board vote until federal charges are filed. They don't want anything that might compromise their investigation." Ava looked at Ryan, eyebrows raised. "Malcolm, we have evidence that definitively proves Marcus Webb and Patricia Chen have been defrauding Sterling Financial. We'd like to present it to the board this morning as planned." The U.S. Attorney was very clear. I'm sure they were. But this is still our company, and the board deserves to see what we found. If federal investigators want to attend the meeting, they're welcome to, but we're presenting. There was a long pause. 10 a.m., Malcolm said finally. "Don't be late." The boardroom felt different this time. Maybe it was because Ryan knew they had proof. Maybe it was because half the board members looked like they'd been woken up early and told something serious was happening. Maybe it was because two people from the U.S. Attorney's Office were sitting in the back of the room, watching everything with the focused intensity of federal investigators who already knew how this story ended. Malcolm called the meeting to order at exactly 10 a.m. Before we vote on yesterday's tabled motion, Ms. Sterling has requested time to present additional evidence. Ava, you have the floor. Ava stood, calm and controlled, looking like she'd slept 8 hours instead of 2. Thank you, Malcolm. What we're about to show you is the result of 2 weeks of investigation into compliance violations that were designed to destroy this company. Ryan? Ryan pulled up the first slide and began exactly where he'd begun 2 weeks ago, with the opening hook that had stopped 300 shareholders cold in its tracks. Except this time, he had proof. Ryan walked them through it methodically, building the case the way he'd learned to build everything in his life. One piece at a time, each element supporting the next until the structure was undeniable. Transcorp Holdings, the ghost subsidiary that existed only to move money. The 5 vendors who had received payments for services never rendered. Cascade Holdings in Belize, receiving kickbacks within 72 hours. Then the Singapore accounts. Ryan pulled up the trust documents on screen, and the room went absolutely silent. These are the beneficial owner disclosures obtained through cooperation between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Monetary Authority of Singapore, he said. 3 trusts, established 6 months ago. $840,000 transferred from Cascade Holdings directly into these accounts. The beneficial owner of all 3 trusts is Marcus Webb. His name, his passport number, his residential address in Manhattan. He showed the transaction histories next. Money flowing from Sterling Financial to Transcorp, to the vendors, to Cascade, to Singapore. A trail so clear that even someone without financial forensics training could follow it. Catherine Marks was the first to speak. This is definitive proof of fraud. Yes, Ryan said. And Patricia Chen, where is she in this? Patricia approved the initial Transcorp transactions and the vendor payments. She also approved Meridian Consulting, the shell company that gave Webb access to Sterling Financial systems. Her brother David Chen is on the board of SecureNet, the company that benefited from the same scheme when they destroyed my company 3 years ago. Malcolm had gone very pale. Are there charges pending? One of the federal investigators in the back stood up. Agent Sarah Kim, U.S. Attorney's Office. We're filing charges against Marcus Webb and Patricia Chen within 48 hours. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering. We're also investigating David Chen's role. We'll need full cooperation from Sterling Financial, including all financial records and communications. You'll have it, Ava said immediately. Jonathan Pike leaned forward. What about the compliance violations, the regulatory filing that started all this? Fabricated, Ryan said. The violations cited in the filing referenced transactions that were real, but the interpretation was deliberately misleading. Once you remove the fraudulent vendor payments and the Transcorp transfers, there are no violations, just normal business operations that were made to look suspicious. The room erupted in conversation, board members talking over each other, some angry, some shocked, all of them trying to process what they'd just learned. Malcolm banged his pen on the table. Order. We need order. He waited for silence. Ava, I owe you an apology. The board owes you an apology. We were prepared to remove you based on manufactured evidence. You were doing your jobs, Ava said, though her voice carried an edge. Protecting the company. I understand that. Still, this should never have gotten this far. Malcolm looked at Ryan. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the board, thank you. Your analysis quite literally saved this company. Ryan didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to accept gratitude for doing something that had felt less like heroism and more like survival. I just showed you the pattern, he said. Ava's the one who had the courage to believe it when everyone else thought she was wrong. Catherine Marks stood. I move to formally clear Ava Sterling of all compliance violations and restore full CEO authority. Second, Jonathan Pike said. All in favor? 12 hands went up. Unanimous. Motion carries. Ava, you're reinstated. The compliance investigation is officially closed. Malcolm paused. We'll also need to discuss security measures to prevent this from happening again, but that can wait. Right now, I think we all need to process what we've learned. The board members filed out slowly, some stopping to shake Ava's hand, others looking shell-shocked. The federal investigators stayed behind, asking questions about document access and timeline details that Ava handled with the same calm competence she'd shown throughout. When the room finally emptied, it was just Ryan and Ava again, standing in the space where 2 weeks ago they'd been fighting for survival. "We won," Ava said, like she was testing the words. "Yeah, we did. Webb's going to prison, Patricia's facing charges, the company's safe." She laughed, but it sounded slightly hysterical. "I can't believe we actually pulled this off." Ryan wanted to celebrate, wanted to feel the relief that should come with victory, but all he felt was exhausted and oddly empty, like he'd been running towards something for so long that stopping felt disorienting. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now? Now we rebuild. Fix the systems Webb exploited, hire a new CFO who actually works for us instead of against us. Get back to running the company." Ava looked at him. "And I figure out how to thank the man who saved everything I've built." "You don't need to thank me. You paid me. I paid you consultant rates for 2 weeks. That's not even close to what this was worth." Ryan shrugged. "Money's not why I did it. I know. Which is exactly why I want to figure out appropriate compensation." She paused. "Also, the board wants to offer you a position, Director of Strategic Risk Assessment. You'd work directly with me, build out a department focused on identifying threats before they become crises. It's a real job, Ryan. Not consulting, not temporary." The offer hung in the air between them, and Ryan felt something twist in his chest. "I can't," he said. "Why not? You're brilliant at this. You just proved that." "Because I have a daughter who needs stability. Because I made a promise to myself 3 years ago that I wouldn't go back to this world. Because—" He stopped, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. "Because I'm good at this, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. When I'm good at something, I lose myself in it. I become the kind of father who forgets to say goodnight, who misses school plays, who's physically present but mentally always somewhere else." Ava was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't have to be true this time." "Maybe not, but I can't risk it. Lily's 6 years old. She needs me now in ways she won't need me in 10 years. I can't give her half my attention because the other half is always running risk assessments." "So you're going back to the sandwich cart?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe something else. But not corporate. Not this." Ryan gestured at the boardroom, the city beyond the windows, the whole complicated world of high-stakes business that had chewed him up once before. "I learned my limits, Ava. This is past them." He could see disappointment in her face, but also understanding. She didn't push, didn't try to change his mind, and he was grateful for that. "The offer stands," she said finally. "If you change your mind, any time in the next year, the job's yours." "Thank you, really, but I don't think I will." They stood there for another moment, and Ryan realized this was goodbye. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind where someone storms out or makes grand declarations, just the quiet kind where two people who'd been through something intense together acknowledged that the thing was over now, and they had to figure out how to go back to their separate lives. "I should go," he said. "I promised Lily I'd pick her up from school myself today." "Of course. Ryan?" Ava touched his arm, the same brief contact she'd made in the hallway 2 weeks ago. "Whatever you decide to do next, don't go back to hiding. You're too good for that. So are you. Don't let this make you afraid to trust people." "I'll try. No promises." Ryan gathered his things and headed for the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught one last glimpse of Ava standing in the conference room, looking simultaneously triumphant and alone. The ride down felt longer than the ride up had 2 weeks ago. The next few days were strange. The news broke on Thursday. Federal charges filed against Marcus Webb and Patricia Chen for wire fraud and conspiracy. The story made the financial press, complete with details about the Singapore accounts and the systematic scheme to defraud Sterling Financial. Ryan's name appeared in a few articles as an unnamed consultant who identified the pattern, which was fine with him. He'd had enough public attention after Technova collapsed. Webb was arrested Friday morning trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. Patricia was already gone, disappeared somewhere, though federal investigators seemed confident they'd find her eventually. David Chen, Patricia's brother, resigned from SecureNet's board and lawyered up, though no charges had been filed against him yet. Sterling Financial stock actually went up on the news, which Ava explained in a text meant investors were relieved the problem had been identified and removed rather than allowed to fester. Ryan went back to his apartment, back to his small life, back to making breakfast for Lily and helping with homework and reading the dragon story at night. It should have felt like relief, like returning to safety after a dangerous detour. Instead, it felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit anymore. On Saturday morning, he was making pancakes, real ones this time, not the burned rush job version, when Lily asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Are you going back to the sandwich cart?" Ryan flipped a pancake, buying time. "I don't know, Bug. Maybe." "Why?" "Because you seem different, like you did the hard thing and now you don't know what to do with the easy thing." 6 years old and already reading him better than most adults ever had. "The easy thing pays our bills," he said carefully. "Keeps our apartment. Lets me be here when you need me. But you don't like it anymore." "I never really liked it. It was just safe." "Ms. Rodriguez says safe is good, but not if it makes you sad." Ryan set down the spatula and sat across from her at their small kitchen table. "I'm not sad, Bug. Just thinking about what comes next." "You should call the business princess." "What?" "The one you helped. You should call her. Maybe she can help you figure out what comes next." "It's not that simple." "Why not? You helped her. Friends help each other. That's how it works." Ryan looked at his daughter, syrup on her chin, mismatched socks, absolute certainty in her 6-year-old logic, and realized she was right. He'd spent 2 weeks helping Ava solve her problem and then walked away the moment it was solved, like compartmentalizing his life was somehow noble instead of just another form of hiding. "You're very wise, you know that," he said. "I know, it's because I pay attention. Miss Rodriguez says most people don't pay attention." Miss Rodriguez should definitely write a book. That afternoon, while Lily was at a birthday party, Ryan walked to his sandwich cart for the first time in 2 weeks. Tom, the security guard, was on duty. "Ryan, thought you quit. Haven't seen you around." "Took some time off, needed to handle something." "That's something related to why Sterling Financial's CEO personally thanked you in yesterday's press conference?" Ryan hadn't seen the press conference, hadn't wanted to, but apparently Ava had mentioned him anyway, despite his preference for anonymity. "Maybe," Tom grinned. "You're a man of mystery, Ryan Carter. Always said there was more to you than sandwiches." Ryan unlocked the cart and looked at his setup. The coolers, the containers, the organized simplicity that had been his whole world for 3 years. It felt smaller now. Not wrong exactly, but insufficient, like trying to live in a room when you'd remembered what a house felt like. He'd built this life intentionally, had chosen safety over risk, simplicity over complexity, control over trust. And for a while that had been exactly what he needed. But needs changed. People changed. And clinging to safety just because it was safe was another form of surrender. Ryan closed the cart without setting up and pulled out his phone. The text to Ava was short. "Can we talk?" "Not about work, about something else." Her response came 2 minutes later. "Dinner tonight? There's a place in Brooklyn I've been wanting to try, casual." "What time?" 7. I'll text you the address." Ryan confirmed and spent the rest of the afternoon trying not to overthink what this meant. Was it a business dinner? A thank you dinner? Something else entirely? And why did the uncertainty make him feel like he was 16 again instead of 32? The restaurant was small, tucked into a Brooklyn neighborhood Ryan didn't know. The kind of place that probably didn't take reservations, but somehow always had tables for people who mattered. Ava was already there when he arrived, sitting in a booth in the back, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger and less intimidating than her usual tailored suits. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely surprised. "You invited me." "I know, but after you turned down the job offer, I thought maybe you were done with me, with this whole situation." Ryan slid into the booth across from her. "I'm not done with you. I'm just done with corporate." "There's a difference?" "I think so. I hope so." A waiter appeared with menus and water, and they ordered without much discussion. Pasta for her, steak for him, a bottle of wine to share because it felt like the kind of night that warranted wine. When they were alone again, Ava leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how being good at something makes it dangerous, about not wanting to lose yourself in work again." And I think I understand, but I also think you're using Lily as an excuse to avoid something that scares you." Ryan felt his defenses go up. That's not fair. Lily's not an excuse. She's my priority. She absolutely should be. But being her father doesn't mean you can't also be someone who uses his brain for complex problems. It doesn't mean you have to choose between being present for her and being engaged with work that matters. You don't know what it was like. When Technova collapsed, I was working 80-hour weeks. I missed her second birthday because I was in meetings. Missed her first day of preschool because I was dealing with lawyers. I became the kind of parent I swore I'd never be, and I can't do that again. Then don't. Do it differently this time. Set boundaries. Work 40 hours instead of 80. Be home for dinner. Be present when you're with her, and focused when you're working. It's not all or nothing, Ryan. Isn't it? Every successful person I know chose work over everything else. You work 18-hour days, you're always on, always thinking 3 steps ahead. That's what success requires. Ava was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd heard it. You're right. I do work too much. I'm always on. And you want to know what I've realized over the past 2 weeks? It's exhausting. It's lonely. And it's not actually necessary. She paused. Watching you negotiate between being there for Lily and helping me, watching you set hard boundaries and refuse to compromise on what mattered, that was more impressive than any 80-hour work week I've ever pulled. Their food arrived and they ate in silence for a few minutes, both processing what had been said. I don't know how to do it differently, Ryan admitted finally. How to be good at something without letting it consume me. Maybe that's the work. Learning how to be excellent at something while also being human, while also having relationships and hobbies and a kid who needs you. Ava set down her fork. I'm not saying you should take the job I offered. I'm saying you should figure out what you actually want instead of just choosing the opposite of what hurt you before. Ryan realized she was right. He'd been so focused on not repeating his past mistakes that he hadn't actually thought about what he wanted his future to look like. What do you want? He asked. If you could rebuild your life from scratch, what would it look like? Ava considered this, her finger doing that familiar tapping rhythm against her water glass. Smaller, she said finally. Not the company. I love running Sterling Financial, but my life around it. I'd work reasonable hours. I'd have friends who aren't on the board. I'd date someone who sees me as a person instead of a CEO. She met his eyes. I'd let people in instead of keeping everyone at arm's length because trust is risky. The air between them shifted, became charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. This is a weird conversation to have with someone I hired 2 weeks ago, Ryan said. Is that still what I am? Someone who hired you? I don't know. What are you? Ava smiled, and it was genuine this time, reaching her eyes. I think I'm someone who bought a sandwich in the rain and accidentally found something she didn't know she was looking for. And what's that? Someone who sees me. Actually sees me, not the title or the company or the bank account. Just me trying to figure out how to be human in a world that rewards being a machine. Ryan felt something unlock in his chest, some door he'd kept carefully sealed for 3 years. Lily asked if you were my girlfriend, he said, surprising himself. A couple weeks ago. I told her you were someone I was helping with a project. What would you tell her now? I don't know. What should I tell her? Tell her I'm someone who wants to have dinner with her father, who wants to meet her if that's okay, who wants to see if 2 people who accidentally found each other can figure out how to intentionally build something. Ryan couldn't breathe for a second. The offer was everything he wanted and everything that terrified him, all wrapped up in a simple dinner invitation. Lily would love to meet you, he said. Fair warning, she'll interrogate you about fractions and Miss Rodriguez's wisdom and whether business princesses live in towers. I can handle that. I've faced down hostile boards. 1 6-year-old should be manageable. You'd think that, but Lily's tougher than most boards. They finished dinner talking about small things, favorite books, bad movies, the absurdity of New York real estate. It felt normal and easy, and nothing like the intensity of the previous 2 weeks. When the check came, they split it despite Ava's protests, and Ryan walked her to the subway station. Thank you for tonight, she said. For being willing to talk about this instead of just disappearing. Thank you for not letting me disappear. She kissed him on the cheek, brief, casual, but carrying weight, then headed down the subway stairs, turning once to wave before disappearing into the crowd. Ryan walked home through Brooklyn, past brownstones and bodegas, and the endless complexity of a city full of people trying to figure out their lives. He thought about what Ava had said, about choosing what he wanted instead of just avoiding what had hurt him, about being excellent, while also being human. About trust being risky, but maybe worth it anyway. By the time he got home, Mrs. Kim had put Lily to bed. He paid her, thanked her, then went to check on his daughter. She was awake, reading a book by nightlight. "You're supposed to be asleep, Bug. I was waiting for you. Did you have dinner with the business princess?" "Yeah, I did. Is she nice?" "Very nice. She wants to meet you." Lily's face lit up. "Really? When?" "Soon. Maybe next weekend, if that's okay with you." "It's very okay. Can we show her my dragon picture and my fraction worksheet that I got all right?" "We can show her whatever you want." Lily thought about this seriously. "Does this mean you're not going back to the sandwich cart?" "I don't know yet, but I'm thinking about other options." "Like what?" "Like maybe doing something that uses my brain but doesn't take over my whole life. Something where I can be good at what I do and still be here for you." "That sounds smart. Ms. Rodriguez would approve." Ryan laughed and kissed her forehead. "Go to sleep. We'll talk more about it tomorrow." "Okay." "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you did the hard thing, even if it was scary." "Me too, Bug. Me too." Over the next month, Ryan's life shifted in small, deliberate ways. He didn't go back to the sandwich cart. Instead, he sold it to a young guy from Queens who'd been saving up to start his own business and saw Ryan's established corner as a lucky break. He started consulting part-time, working with small companies that needed strategic risk assessment but couldn't afford a full department. The work was interesting, challenging, and limited to 30 hours a week. Enough to engage his brain, not enough to consume his life. He had dinner with Ava every Friday night. Sometimes just the two of them, sometimes with Lily, who'd taken to calling Ava her friend who lives in the tower and asking detailed questions about what CEOs actually did all day. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, both of them learning how to trust again after years of protecting themselves. There were awkward moments and difficult conversations and the occasional fight about boundaries or expectations or what they were actually doing. But there was also laughter, late-night phone calls, Lily's birthday party where Ava showed up with a present that suggested she'd actually been listening when Lily talked about wanting an advanced art set. Mornings when Ryan woke up and realized he was happy in a way that didn't require protecting himself from future pain. 2 months after the board meeting, Ava invited Ryan and Lily to Sterling Financial Tower for a special presentation. "What kind of presentation?" Ryan asked. "You'll see. Just trust me." They showed up on a Saturday morning when the building was mostly empty. Ava met them in the lobby, looking nervous in a way Ryan had never seen her. "Before we go up, I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay." The board approved a new position, Chief Risk Officer. Someone who reports directly to the CEO and has authority to investigate threats, question decisions, and push back on anything that compromises company integrity. She paused. "The job is yours if you want it. 40-hour work week maximum. Hard stop at 5 o'clock. No weekend work unless there's an actual emergency. Salary that reflects what you're actually worth, not sandwich cart economics." Ryan stared at her. "You created a position for me." "I created a position the company needs. You're the person I want in it. But if you say no, I'll find someone else. This isn't charity, Ryan. It's a real job with real expectations." "Can I think about it?" "Take a week, but I want to show you the office first." They took the elevator to the 42nd floor, one below Ava's office. The space Ava led them to was bright, windowed, with room for a desk and a small couch, and walls that were currently empty but could hold whatever Ryan wanted. "This would be yours," Ava said. "Your space to build the risk assessment program however you think it should work." Lily was exploring, checking out the view, spinning in the desk chair. "Daddy, you can see the whole city from here." "I know, Bug. Is this where you'd work?" "Maybe, if I take the job." Lily looked at Ava. "Would he have to work all the time like before?" "No," Ava said seriously. "He'd work normal hours. And if he ever had to stay late, he'd tell you why and when he'd be home. That's the rule." "What if he forgets?" "Then I'd remind him, because part of my job is making sure the people who work for me don't forget what matters." Lily considered this, then nodded. "Okay, I think you should take it." "Bug, this is my decision. I know, but you like working with her. You smile more when you're doing the hard brain stuff. And you promised you'd do it different this time. So do it different. Take the job and keep the promise. Ryan looked at Ava, who was trying not to smile. She makes a compelling argument, Ava said. She learned from the best. Miss Rodriguez is very wise. Who's Ms. Rodriguez? Ava asked. My teacher, Lily said proudly. She knows everything about fractions and life. They spent another hour at the office, Lily asking questions about what CEOs did and whether Ryan would have his own business cards and if she could visit sometimes. Ava answered everything patiently, and Ryan watched them interact and realized that somewhere in the past 2 months, they'd become something like a family. Not a traditional one, not a smooth or simple one, but a real one built on honesty and imperfection and the willingness to keep trying even when things got complicated. On the way home, Lily fell asleep in the cab, her head against Ryan's shoulder. She likes you, Ryan said quietly to Ava. I like her. She's smart, asks good questions. Doesn't let people get away with corporate nonsense. Wonder where she learned that. Definitely not from her wisely cautious father, Ryan smiled. About the job. Take the week. Think about it. Make sure it's what you want. I don't need a week. Ava looked at him, something hopeful in her expression. I'll take it, Ryan said, on 2 conditions. Name them. First, if it ever starts feeling like it's taking over my life again, I can say so, and we figure out how to fix it together. Agreed. Second condition, you keep having dinner with us. Not as my boss, as you. The person who bought a sandwich in the rain and saw something worth believing in. Ava reached over and took his hand. That's the easiest condition I've ever agreed to. 6 months later, Ryan stood in his office on the 42nd floor, reviewing a risk assessment for a potential acquisition when Lily arrived for her weekly after-school visit. Daddy, I brought my report card. He set aside the assessment immediately. Let's see it. All A's except for 1 B in gym, which Lily explained was because she'd argued with the teacher about whether dodgeball promoted healthy competition or just aggression disguised as sport. Ms. Rodriguez agreed with me, Lily said, but Mr. Hamilton said I should focus on participation instead of analysis. Sounds like Mr. Hamilton doesn't appreciate critical thinking. That's what Ava said. Ryan looked up. Ava was standing in his doorway, holding coffee and looking amused. You're corrupting my daughter with corporate cynicism, Ryan said. Someone has to prepare her for the real world. Also, I brought pastries. Figured you'd both be hungry. They sat in Ryan's office eating pastries and talking about Lily's day and the risk assessment Ryan was working on and whether the company should pursue the acquisition or walk away. Lily asked smart questions about market analysis. Ava explained things in ways a 7-year-old could understand, and Ryan realized this was what it looked like when you built a life instead of just surviving one. After Lily left with Mrs. Kim, Ava lingered. Malcolm asked me again if we're involved, she said. What did you tell him this time? That my personal life is none of the board's business. But yes, we are, and if that's a problem, they can file a complaint. And he said congratulations and asked if you'd look at a vendor contract that seemed suspicious. Turns out your reputation for finding problems is spreading. Wonderful, more work. You love it. She was right. He did love it. Not in the consuming, all-encompassing way he'd loved Technova, but in a sustainable way. A way that let him be good at what he did while also being present for the people who mattered. I'm thinking about asking Lily if it's okay if you come to parent-teacher night, Ryan said. Ms. Rodriguez wants to meet the business princess. I'd be honored. Should I prepare remarks about fractions? Probably. Lily takes her education very seriously. Ava moved closer, and Ryan pulled her into the kind of kiss that still felt new enough to be surprising and familiar enough to feel like home. I love you, she said when they broke apart. I don't think I've said that out loud yet. You haven't. I was waiting to see if you'd figure it out yourself. How very strategic of you. I learned from the best. Ryan kissed her again. I love you too, for the record. Good, because I'd hate to be alone in this. They weren't alone in it. That was the whole point. After years of protecting themselves, of choosing safety over risk, of building walls instead of bridges, they'd both learned the same hard lesson. Trust was terrifying. Vulnerability was dangerous. Opening yourself up to another person meant accepting that they could hurt you in ways you'd never fully recover from. But the alternative, living in a carefully controlled world where nothing could touch you, wasn't actually living. It was just existing, Just making sandwiches at dawn and going through motions and telling yourself that safety was enough. Ryan had spent 3 years telling himself exactly that. 3 years believing that the small, controlled life he'd built was what he deserved after failing so spectacularly. And then Ava Sterling had bought a sandwich in the rain and reminded him that he was more than his failures, more than his fear, more than the safe choices he'd made to protect himself from getting hurt again. She'd seen something in him that he'd forgotten was there, and in the process of helping her save her company, he'd saved something in himself. The belief that trying hard things, even when they scared you, was better than not trying at all. That night, after work, Ryan picked Lily up from Mrs. Kim's and they made dinner together. Pasta with the sauce Lily had decided was her signature dish, which mostly meant she added extra garlic and declared it gourmet. "Daddy? Yeah, Bug? Are you happy now? Like really happy? Not just pretending happy?" The question caught him off guard. He set down the wooden spoon and turned to face his daughter, who was watching him with those serious eyes that saw more than most kids her age. "Yeah," he said honestly. "I'm really happy. Not perfect happy. That's not a real thing. But happy in a way that feels solid." "Why?" "Because you used to have sad eyes, even when you smiled. But now you don't. Now you have happy eyes." Ryan knelt down so they were eye level. "You know what made the difference?" "What?" "Trying again, being willing to do hard things even though I was scared, and having people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Like me?" "Exactly like you. And like Ava. And like my very wise daughter, who told me I should call the business princess instead of hiding." Lily grinned. "Ms. Rodriguez says I'm perceptive. That means I notice things." Miss Rodriguez is absolutely right. They ate dinner and later Ava came over for movie night, which had become a Friday tradition. They watched something animated that Lily had chosen, and Ava pretended to find intellectually stimulating, and Ryan sat between the two people who mattered most and thought about how far he'd come from that morning 2 years ago when he'd been making sandwiches in the dark, convinced that this was all his life would ever be. He'd been wrong about that. Life wasn't static. People weren't fixed. And failure wasn't final unless you decided it was. Sometimes you got a second chance. Sometimes someone saw past your defenses and reminded you of who you used to be. Sometimes a woman bought a sandwich in the rain and accidentally started something that changed everything. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to trust again, to try again, to believe that the hard things were worth doing, sometimes you built something better than what you'd lost. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real. Human. Solid enough to stand on. Ryan looked over at Ava, who was explaining the movie's narrative structure to Lily with the same analytical precision she brought to quarterly reports, and thought about the board meeting where he'd stood up and exposed Marcus Webb's conspiracy. That moment had felt like the climax, the victory, the end of the story. But it wasn't. This was the end of the story. Sitting on a couch with his daughter and the woman he loved, watching a movie about dragons who learned to trust humans, living a life that was complicated and imperfect and built on the radical belief that trying hard things was better than hiding from them. The business princess had found her voice. The failed entrepreneur had found his purpose. And somewhere in the middle of saving a company, they'd both learned the hardest lesson of all. That love, real love, the kind built on honesty and imperfection and showing up even when it's scary, wasn't something you earned or deserved or won. It was something you chose every day, in small ways and big ones. It was making time for dinner even when work was demanding. It was being honest about your fears instead of pretending you didn't have them. It was trusting someone enough to be vulnerable and believing they'd be careful with that vulnerability. It was choosing to try again, even though trying meant risking failure. And for Ryan Carter and Ava Sterling, two people who'd spent years protecting themselves from exactly that risk, choosing to try was the bravest thing either of them had ever done. The movie ended. Lily fell asleep curled against Ryan's side. Ava leaned her head on his shoulder, and Ryan realized that this moment, this quiet, ordinary moment, was worth every hard thing he'd done to get here. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For buying a sandwich in the rain, for seeing something in me when I couldn't see it myself, for not letting me hide." Ava lifted her head and looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same complicated mix of gratitude and fear and hope that he felt. Thank you for being worth finding, she said. And that, Ryan thought, was exactly right. Not that he was perfect, or that she was perfect, or that anything about their relationship was smooth or easy, but that they were worth the effort, worth the risk, worth showing up for, even when showing up was hard. Outside, the city hummed with millions of stories unfolding simultaneously, people falling in love and falling apart, trying hard things and hiding from them, choosing courage or choosing safety. Inside, three people who'd found each other against unlikely odds sat together in the comfortable silence of chosen family. The sandwich cart was gone. The conspiracy was solved. The crisis was over. But the story, the real story, the one about learning to trust again and choosing to try even when you're terrified, that story was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan was excited to see where it would go.